All right. I'm gonna take a prayer request and then I'll let you come introduce yourself. I just wanna shout out to our Uganda brothers and Brother Patrick, Brother Bruno, Alex, whoever is paying attention out there, hopefully all of you. We are not gonna have class next Tuesday, so all of you who are in here, we won't have class next Tuesday. My instructor was not able to come and I do not have time to put together what he's the professional at. I'm good at certain areas, just like Randy will tell you, we've got our strengths, but in the areas that I'm not strong in, I'm not gonna come bore you for 3 hours with what I don't know, right? So.
Appreciate
He
that.
said, "Amen."
Well, I mean, you're honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't teach every one of these classes, there's just areas that I'm not an expert in, and so.
At least you know that.
Yeah, because we've got some folks in here that, I mean, they are the best of what they do. And I can do that in a couple of areas, but not nearly in what
I
I.
tell you, what you do teach is very appreciated.
Yeah, well, those are my areas, that's why, so, like we have Gary Anthony who comes and teaches us about worship and about all the things that go with having a praise team and a choir and CCLI licensing and all of that. I mean, he's top of the line. If I started singing right now, you'd all leave. I mean,
Hey,
not
the
my
Lord will
area.
be happy to hear you, okay?
The Lord is the
only one.
That's okay.
Y'all know one time I was singing in the shower, the water just stopped.
So that's made a water bill, Carl, that's why.
So let's
That was him again.
let's take up some prayer requests. I know Sister Wadalis said she wasn't gonna be here. Her daughter, I think she's 13, Angelise has fever and is not feeling well, so we'll pray for her. Our brother Mike back there has a surgery scheduled. Is it for the 15th? When is it?
I don't know, Scott White wasn't answering.
What did I shut you out? Just so I know your
I
memory.
know. We couldn't get that.
Now he's gonna have a tumor removed off his kidney.
Ooh,
So,
God is right there.
I mean, yes,
My sister-in-law, her name is Kelly, she's gonna have surgery tomorrow.
Nice.
It has to do with the veins in her legs. Like, she's got like restricted blood vessels, I guess. I don't really know. I know they're going in and maybe,
Put stents in.
yeah,
okay.
so.
Also for, helping his family flying
Right.
flying out. And my brother is also gonna be having surgery on a hernia.
Okay,
Your name is Freddie.
ready. All right. I have to remember.
You did.
Yes, it is. This is Laura.
I missed my.
Hi. She's the accountant. Somebody has Dodge there.
Oh, yeah, the back of it's over.
Yeah, the back is open. I don't know.
Dodge van.
Let me check, make sure that the time,
It's
it's pulled off.
Gray.
That's her, didn't I hear Dodge? I'm like, that's not sure. I said, huh?
Yeah, the back is.
Right then. It's called.
He got there. And so we'll pray for their upcoming trip. Door, that's gonna be hopefully a wonderful time with his family
Yeah.
or with actually with her family.
Yes.
So Freddie,
Freddie.
Kelly, Mike, and their albums. I got them all right here. Anything else?
Let's pray for some peace after the elections.
Oh, yeah. I know regardless of, I mean, we all have who we want to be, in office, but it's not worth blowing up buildings
Oh,
and
no.
hurting people over.
Beating up people or anything like that.
So, yeah, we need to pray.
Agreed.
We pray for my son Isaiah, he's, 14 and, he has questions about the Bible and, so unfortunately for him, I'm starting to read the book called, Widely the Bible by John MacArthur. And hopefully I'll strengthen his faith a little bit about the Bible and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is normal to have questions, especially coming up. There's a lot of stuff out there that tries to refute the Bible. I've had everything imaginable. I was just sharing with Brother Randy some of the things that people will come, crazy things, but other people come with some pretty hardcore stuff that you really need to be able to answer. So, the world is tugging on them, and we have to be able to defend our faith. So, well, let's pray for these, and then I'm going to let Brother Randy come, and he will give a short bio of himself. And he has been a I don't know, 20 plus years as a pastor, right? So, yeah, long time. So he's going to come help us do a better job. That I know when I first couple of business meetings I led in a church, it was kind of like, are y'all cool with this? And I had Carl's rules of order and they so right. We have to get a second on that. Okay, we get a second on that, and I'll second that, get that, I just kind of went with it, and after about 4 or 5 times, figured it out, but no one ever, I wish I'd have had this class before I became a pastor. I would have not looked so foolish up there, so let's pray. Lord, we are so grateful to be here tonight, and I thank you for everyone who has taken the time from their busy schedules. I just pray as they have had days at work or whatever their day was, that you would just by the power of your Spirit clear our hearts and clear our minds for tonight. Lord, I do pray for Freddie, and I just pray that you will be with him, and that as he's preparing, that you would be with the doctors, be with family, just to help them to get through this time. I do pray for Kelly as well. Lord, whatever's going on with the veins in her legs, arteries in her legs, for these stents to be put in, I just pray you'll be with her and with her family. And Lord, as Mike is preparing for surgery, Lord, we don't know when, but we just pray that they'll be able to remove this tumor off his kidneys, and that he won't even have to look back. He'll just move forward and know that it's been taken care of. And Lord, I do pray for Brother Ed's son, Isaiah. Lord, we know that in the world we live in today, everyone is throwing all their beliefs at you, and sometimes it is hard to know if the Bible is true or if you're real. And Lord, I just pray, first off, that you would reveal yourself to Isaiah, that you would make yourself real to him in a very personal way. I pray that as Ed is trying to teach him things, Lord, until we've experienced you, all of that is just words on pages. And I just pray that your Spirit would move in his life and draw him to yourself. Lord, I pray for Wadalis as she's caring for her children, and I pray for Angelise as she would get over this fever and get to feeling better. Lord, I just lift Hope and Evelyn and their whole family up to you as they prepare to go to Ecuador. I just pray that you would be with the whole family, that they would have a wonderful time together. Take them there safely and bring them back safely. And Lord, I just pray that you use Randy in a powerful way tonight. Speak to us, help to give us the skills that we need to lead our people properly in the church. And Lord, we just lift all this time up to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. And you let me know what the order you want these pass it out. Okay.
It doesn't go wrong.
Okay, no problem.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Once again, Carl can't find anybody else who is willing to come on this particular Tuesday, so you're stuck with me, I guess, but I'm thankful for the opportunity. As he said, have been a pastor for, was in full-time ministry as pastor for 20 years. And before that, served a couple of years and volunteer missions, and then served 4 years as a part-time youth minister in Abilene. And since then, so since September 2019, I left the full-time ministry and took a job as a manager of a Headstone Sales office in Waco, and so I've been doing that for just a little over 3 years now and love it. It's got a lot of pastoral type opportunities, and so I've enjoyed being able to help people in a kind of a different situation. Learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about people and who are going through difficult times and dealing with them in the midst of that to provide kind of a practical need in their life. So I've also been interim pastor, finished an interim pastor up back in July for a really small church out in McDade, which is about an hour, a little over an hour from here. And that was a challenge. 7 people, average attendance, and that was
And how
a
was
challenge.
that?
So it was I learned a lot about myself again and about the church and about people. I told them at the beginning, they asked me for a year commitment, and I said, let's try 6 months and let's see how it goes. So I gave them 6 months, and that was good. That's no problem. So I was pastor at First Baptist Church in Holland. That was where I was pastor the longest, for 14 years there, from 2005 to 2019. And then prior to that was at the Crossroads Baptist Church in Rotan, just outside of, just north of Abilene, a little ways. Was there for a little over 6 years. But I mentioned that I was a youth minister, part-time youth minister, back when I was in college. Quite a few years ago, but I served as that part-time youth minister at a little church, North Park Baptist Church in Abilene, and my pastor, his name was Lewis Johnson. And I remember very long after I started there, he set me down and, well, on several occasions, he talked to me about a lot of things, but he would talk through insights with me, and I appreciate him. He's still a very good friend. He just retired actually from that church, so he spent well over 30 years in ministry at a church that runs about 75 to 100. And he's just a wonderful man, one of the best preachers, and certainly one of the best teachers I've ever heard, and definitely a mentor in my ministry. But on one of those occasions when we were talking and he was sharing those things with me as a 22-year-old, I was, trying to pay attention and understand what he was saying. But he talked to me about church administration, about how to run a church, right? He'd been doing it for several years, and just the importance of that. And he gave me a copy from a magazine that used to be printed called Church Leadership. And I still kept it with me for a lot of years. I couldn't find it the last time I looked for it, but the title of the article was "Called to Minister, Forced to Administer." So kind of the point of the article was that so many times as ministers, we feel called by God to serve in the church and serve his people, and we're excited about that. But then we get into those positions and we realize, hey, this is a lot of work. It's not just showing up on Sundays. It's not just preaching, which most pastors enjoy doing. It's not just dealing with people and meeting their needs, spiritual needs, which all of those things are important, but that's not all that is needed for ministry. We have to be able to run the church, or help run the church, or help lead the people who will run the church, for lack of a better term. Somebody has to kind of, be in charge. So every minister, no matter how big, or every ministry, no matter how big or small, somebody needs to be the administrator. And there's plenty of administrative duties to be covered. And especially in small churches, new churches, that pastor is the only paid staff, perhaps, only person, or everyone looks to that person for guidance. So we have a calling to preach or teach or serve with youth, whatever it is, but then we're also called to be good stewards, be good managers of what God provides through the church. One of the textbooks that I used way back in my seminary days, which is a long time ago, was a book by a man named Franklin Siegler, titled A Theology of Church and Ministry. And he said this, he says, organizations are living. and powerful only when the persons involved in the organizations give life through their thoughts and energies. Organized groups achieve in proportion to the effectiveness of their leadership. The church is no exception. As a human institution, it stands in need of leadership. Its spiritual objectives demand clarification and enunciation, and its mission depends upon organization, planning, and guidance. Church administration is necessary then for the accomplishment of the church's ministry. And then he goes on to say, administration involves more than methods or techniques. It's more than just a series of mechanical procedures. Its aims are spiritual, and its methods must comply with its primary purpose. The idea that certain functions of the pastor's ministry are spiritual and the administration is less than spiritual is a false concept. Administration should be viewed as vital and meaningful for the spiritual life of the church. So many times we think, well, these are the spiritual things that I do. I preach, I teach, I share the gospel with people, I counsel them, I listen to them, I pray with them. Those are the spiritual things. And then over here, I do help make the budget and make sure that all the committees have the certain members that they need, and that the kids have things to eat on Wednesday nights, or whatever it is, that administration part. We kind of separate the two, but really they're all part of the same thing. They're all spiritual aspects. One is more practical perhaps, but it's all spiritual in the same idea. So administration within the church has spiritual implications. It also has practical implications, and so leaders have to lead in an organized fashion in order to be able to accomplish the task that the church is called, to which the church is called. One of the things that I like to do is to think about the fact that the church administration is the leadership which equips the church to be the church and do the work of the church. So we have our calling, but we also have this administration, and the two have to come together, because without the administration part of it, then the church can't be all that it's supposed to be. So the church is given resources by God, whether those are people, finances, physical resources, if it's a building or something like that. We all know that they come from Him. And we know more importantly that they're limited. We have limited resources, limited money, limited volunteers, limited church facilities, perhaps. And so from a human perspective, we see them as limited, but God's giving those resources to us. And even though they may seem in short supply to us, it's still our responsibility as ministers to manage those resources in a way that gives the best result, gives the best return. We're being good stewards. So when we consider church administration in that kind of light, it's both spiritual and practical. But there's a biblical basis for all of these ideas of administration in God's word. There's no specific passage of scripture that says, this is how you're supposed to run a church, but there's a lot to form a basis for the organization and the administration of the church. The church, of course, is first discussed by Jesus Himself, founded upon the arrival of the Holy Spirit, manifested in the lives of the disciples at Pentecost in Jerusalem. So the church started on that day, and we know from the book of Acts that it grew exponentially from that point. And we know, according to Luke in the gospel, in the Acts of the Apostles, that more than 3,000 were added to their number on that single day. And so just think about all the logistical and administrative nightmares that there would be with 3,000 new people coming into your church on one particular day. It'd be exciting. I mean, it'd be thrilling to have that happen, to see that happen, but then we've got to do something with all of these people and take care of them. So, and in fact, we see that's exactly what happened. We learn of one of those, just one of those logistical nightmares in Acts chapter 6. Probably you know the story. Acts chapter 6, where they encounter kind of this first big problem. Does anybody remember what was the issue that kind of turned into a problem?
They were taking care of the Jewish widows, not the Gentile.
Okay, all right. So in Acts chapter 6, we know that in some way, they were providing some kind of daily distribution of food, and it seemed, at least to the Greek-speaking widows, that they were being neglected, and that the Jewish-speaking widows were being cared for. And so there's this issue. I mean, this group over here is saying, well, we're not being treated like this group over here, and therefore we must be less or whatever. And so there was tension, right? Among these widows from the different ethnic backgrounds. So right from the beginning of the church, here we got all these races being mixed together, and they're from other parts of the world, and now, you know, there's racial tension. I mean, it's really what the kind of boiled down to. So there was this daily distribution of food. Some were being neglected, it seems, and others were receiving what they were supposed to receive. So, you know, instead of praying, perhaps, before they started complaining, they just went ahead straight to the complaining. I mean, it's not like churches today, because people don't do that anymore. They go straight to the Lord and bring their petitions to him, and then they come to you. Right. Not much has changed since that very first church. They began to question why they were being overlooked. They they probably talked about it amongst themselves. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, so to speak, all this starts bubbling up, and the apostles, the leaders of the church, get word that there's an issue, there's a problem, that there are people who are dissatisfied. So how did the church solve the problem? Well, they had a business meeting, right? That's how you know the very first church was a Baptist church. Because they had a business meeting. There we go. And in this business meeting, the leadership committee presented a report to the congregation, which included a recommendation to create and appoint a committee of men who would take care of the responsibility of serving these Hellenistic or these Greek-speaking Jewish widows their daily distribution of food. So the leadership committee is the apostles, right? And then they appoint, they say to the congregation, you choose 7 men, you know, of good report and who are filled with the Holy Spirit to take on these responsibilities. So it's a great example of administration. They see a problem, they recommend a solution, and then they implement the plan. That's exactly what's going on in Acts chapter 6. So the result of that ministry of administration, I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing here. That's the practical need is being seen, it's being addressed, and then immediately they put it into implementation. So the result of that ministry of administration is in Acts chapter 6, verse 7. So the word of God spread, and the number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. So they had 3,000 people brought into the church in one day. They had this problem that arose because of that. They addressed that problem, and then the result of that was that the gospel continued to spread in the city of Jerusalem. You know, the apostles, they were the ones apparently doing this every day. They were taking responsibility. There's only, 11 of them, 12 that they had replaced, Judas with Matthias, but they couldn't do it all. They couldn't do it all by themselves. They needed help. They needed assistance. And so they just said, it's not right for us to give up, time of praying and in the word, to be able to just do this practical ministry. And so that's how we get our office of deacons. The people they're called to be the servants of the tables, right? They're called to be the servants of others.
Earlier you said you shouldn't separate administration from the spiritual things.
Mm-hmm.
The very office you're talking about, one of the first qualifications was that they were filled with the Spirit.
Right.
You don't want unspiritual men taking care of young female widows.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, they're filled with the Holy Spirit to do what? To serve the tables. I mean, to serve bread. Now we know that's not what they ended up doing, right? God used them. I mean, I think some of them probably continued doing that. We know Philip at least, and Stephen, they went out to share the gospel from there. But But yeah, that's exactly right. So they said, be sure and choose people who are filled with the Spirit in order to do this very practical,
Right.
everyday kind of ministry. Paul gives gives an example of administration in the early church. He told Titus, one of his people that he mentored, in his letter to him, that the reason Titus was left on the island of Crete was to appoint elders among the congregation. So again, administration, we've got to have people to lead the ministry. First Timothy, Paul writes about the qualifications of overseers and deacons. Again, Paul, so he's saying here, look for these kind of qualities in the people that you put in charge of the ministry. Not only are they to be practically minded, but they're supposed to have, good rapport with their own families, and, not be given too much wine, those kinds of, all of those qualifications, but they're doing practical ministry, but they have spiritual qualifications. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul compares the church with the human body, each part playing a uniquely valuable role, but he mentions specific offices within the church organization. Listen to these verses from chapter 12, verses 27 and 28. It says, together you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of that body. In the church, God has given a place first to apostles, second to prophets, and third to teachers. Then God has given a place to those who do miracles, those who have gifts of healing, those who can help others, those who are able to govern, and those who can speak in different languages. So if you focus in on just that one word, those who have the ability to govern, right? Administration, leading, those are the kinds of people. That's one of the offices. That's one of the roles that we need to have, someone leading the administration in our churches. So each of these positions, Paul mentions, the specific help provided for an orderly and efficient operation of the church itself. What about you? Those are the kind of things, the biblical passages that come to my mind when I think about administration. But can you think of other passages, New Testament, Old Testament, that speak about administration?
Well, whenever Moses was talking to the Lord, and so he told Moses to go and anoint, what did he call it? Not pastors, but anoint Aaron, and then they chose other people too,
Yeah.
to help him. 'Cause he
Right.
had so many-
He was overwhelmed, right?
Yes.
And so it was his father-in-law, Jethro, who
That's
came
what
to
I
him,
think I-
and God spoke through his father-in-law and said, hey, you're gonna burn yourself out. You can't do this by yourself, because you've got all of these responsibilities. You've got these people coming to you who need help with deciding, practical matters. It was all about, well, that was my chicken. No, my chicken. Whatever. And he was having to decide whose chicken it was. And it was just taking up all of his time doing all of these basic things. And so he needed some help. And so, yeah, I think as I asked that question, I thought, really Moses in that situation would be a good one. Good example. What others that you think of? I don't have any. I'm asking, that's what I'm asking you.
You have the people that are kind of like the custodians, like, for example, the ladies that wash the feet there in the New Testament. So in the way that they were, you have to have the custodians take care of the,
Right.
or take care of the people,
Sure.
whatever it may be, so.
Right.
What about Nehemiah?
Mm.
He had a company that was on guard while he had another company that was building the wall in front of him. He had them in different stations.
Yeah, they were.
So you back then they used security.
Yeah.
But they weren't in the church.
Yeah, but they built the wall right in front of their own house, right? Take personal responsibility. So.
And then they had shifts, though. It said that some would had their sword and would be on guard, trumpeters ready to blow the trumpets.
But, unfortunately, these days you have to have somebody that is security in your building. Unfortunately, in our building, we have to have guys that have guns and not out in the open, but they have guns.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah, so I think, those kind of leadership ideas of just making sure there's someone who's responsible for these various ministries. But somebody has to be over that whole thing, you know, Nehemiah was over the whole project. And so we as ministers, I think, are over, we're over the whole church. It's not that we're in charge of everything, because we know that God's, you know, in charge of everything, but he's placed us there to be able to give guidance and direction and leadership.
When Joshua went into Jericho.
Mhm.
You know, they all had assignments when they were marching. You know, they had certain roles they had to play, and like when
Right?
they would do certain things.
Sure.
So that's kind of.
It's all leadership and using those gifts that God gives each one of us. So now, as we move together through our time tonight, I'm gonna just share with you insights I hope that you'll find helpful to related to issues that I addressed during my years, especially at First Baptist Church in Holland. And, you know, I brought some resources with me to share with you, you know, mostly they're just copies of things that I developed at First Baptist Church. And most of them were really shared with me, you know, and I developed them during my time there. So we started where the early church began, you know, with facing a problem. I said that they had a business meeting, and that was kind of a joke, but it really is what they did. They brought everyone together and they talked about the issue, and then the apostles gave that recommendation. So part of what we're going to talk about tonight, and we're just going to kind of hit the highlights here, is just conducting a business meeting. That's part of the responsibilities that I have in your. What's that?
We need to start working meetings.
Yes, we're trying to start more committees. But as far as conducting a business meeting, Carl already mentioned, you know, I wish he'd had some kind of class, and I didn't have any class either, but prior to becoming a pastor. So how many of you grew up in a church, not necessarily a Baptist? All right, few of you. How many of you have ever been to a business meeting in a church any time in your life? Okay, all right. Now then, if you've been to a business meeting, you pretty much know how to lead a business meeting. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's not hard. I've only pastored 2 churches, but I've been part of 8 churches throughout my lifetime. And so I've been in a lot of business meetings during 51, almost 52 years of life. So when I went to pastor my first church, I said it was Crossroads Baptist Church outside of Rotan near Abilene. I had never led a business meeting before. And I just did what I saw other pastors do as I was growing up. And I said the exact same things that they said, because I'm like, well, if it worked for them, it must work for me. So I just, you know, like a little child, you know, grows up and mimics mom and dad, right? I just mimicked what I saw, what I heard. And, you know, I did that at business meetings for the church. I did that at associational business meetings, you know, being the moderator of the association. I've been to convention meetings. I saw what they did there. That's very formal, you know, at the Texas Baptist General Convention of Texas, they have a person who's the, you know, guy in charge of making sure all the right things are said at the right time, and parliamentarian is what they call him. Yeah, you know, he's got an exciting job. And, you know, I didn't show up at that very first church with Robert's Rules of Order. I had never even heard of that. And I just did the best that I could. So, and probably if Robert had been around, he would have just been sobbing over the fact that I didn't know what I was doing. But so I think all of us, if we've been called to ministry, if we've been in a ministry before, and we're called upon just out of the blue to lead a business meeting, could probably step up here and just take over, right? Take responsibility. So I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on it, but, you know, just some practical considerations. First of all, you have to determine how often and when your church is going to hold business meetings. Very practical idea. When, where, and how, you know, how often, whatever. The church that I pastored in Rotan had monthly business meetings. So once a month, we had a business meeting. And this was how they knew it was time for business meeting. It happened on the second Wednesday after the first Sunday. Now, isn't that just clear as mud? the second Wednesday after the first Sunday of the month. So you always had to have your calendar. Well, let's see, this month started on Thursday, so that's where the first Sunday was, and 2 Wednesdays after that, here it is, that's when we are, or, you know, if the month started on Sunday, you know, and, oh my gosh. So it was floating, right?
Don't forget
It
about
was
leap
never
year.
the same, what's that?
Don't forget about leap year.
Well, yeah, and then you throw those kinds of things. So now thankfully I had a church clerk who was, I mean, she was on top of things. And so she always said, Randy, it's time for business meeting, you know, they call it church conference. It's time for church conference. The next Wednesday, I'm like, oh yeah, thanks Betty. I appreciate you reminding me of that. Now, when I came to Holland, they had monthly meetings also on the second Sunday of the month, but eventually we made the decision just to have it once a quarter. So once every 3 months or so, 4 months. And the primary reason was just practical. I mean, on those monthly meetings we were having, you know, it was like, all right, let's have a reading of the minutes from the last month's meeting, you know, and I had a church clerk, you know, or Jerry Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
I had a church clerk who, she didn't want to read those minutes, and she'd say, well, y'all can read for yourself. All right, so everybody had a chance to read the minutes, all right, good. Okay, so we vote on the minutes. And then, you know, any old business, any new business, you know, we gotta have the treasurer's report, you know, those kinds of things.
Sunday school.
Sunday school report, yeah, all the little reports, and, you know, but it really is about 20 minutes long. Every month, we had to tack that on at the end of the service and the evening, and so we just finally said, hey, why don't we do it once a quarter?
I
And
think
we're-
there's Zoom meetings now.
Right, right, well, you know, then, you know, during COVID, you're gonna have any meetings, right, so. So you gotta just decide, when are we meeting, how often are we meeting? You know, and typically in your church's bylaws, you're gonna have some kind of statement about when, or if, I mean, some churches don't have business meetings anymore. At all, you know, some committee handles all of that, but. Most of your Baptist churches, small churches especially, still want to have a business meeting on a semi-regular basis anyway. Then you've got to decide what you're going to talk about in those business meetings, you know, decide in advance as what really the church should act on. Not everything needs to be taken to the church. Again, the church in Rotan that I pastored was a small country church. They had done it this way all their almost 100 years at that point, that they voted on every dollar spent. Didn't matter what it was, they wanted to vote on it. And, you know, it would just drive you crazy that you had to bring every little thing to them. But, you know, when I came to Holland, they had at one time been that kind of church where they wanted to vote on, you know, whether we're buying paper towels this month or not. I mean, you know, they really wanted to vote on every little thing. But then after I'd been there a little while, I said, you know what, we've got these committees. We've got these committees over here that one's responsible for the building and grounds, one's responsible for the finances, one's responsible for, you know, whatever the other entities were. Why don't we trust them to do the work that we've asked them to do? And so we gave them a responsibility to say, if it's up to $500 or whatever the minimum amount was, you just take care of it. You know, you've got money in your budget, you know how much you can spend, you just spend it. And we won't vote on that. Now, if it's over that, you need to bring a recommendation to the church and we'll talk about it. So we just empowered those committees to do what we were asking them to do already, or what we said we were. And so there wasn't this bottleneck of having to come to a business meeting every month or every quarter to vote on one little item. And then I guess the third, one of the third practical consideration is you got to follow your church's bylaws. So whatever your church's bylaws look like, and for some people say, well, we've never seen ours, we don't know what they are. I have a friend who's he's resigned. His last Sunday is actually this coming Sunday. And he told me this last week. So he resigned 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago now. And people are saying, well, we need a copy of the bylaws and the Constitution. And you've got them, told the pastor. He says, no, I've been asking for 8 years to see a copy of your constitution and your
Oh,
bylaws.
wow.
I don't know anything. I don't have anything. I don't have anything. He said, I have a copy of First Baptist Church Hollands because I gave it to him. He's like, I don't have any. They don't even know where their bylaws are, right? So you gotta have some bylaws. You gotta have these documents that guide what you do as a church. It's for legal protection more than anything.
Yep.
But then once you have them, if you can find them, then you've got to follow them, you know, and so it's a dance type of thing, you know, where you look at what the bylaws say and you want to be in line with them as much as you can. There are gonna be times where you need to do something that's against the bylaws. But if you do that regularly, then you need to change your bylaw, right? You gotta make it match. What you say you do has to match what you actually do, or vice versa. This is really what we do, well, then we need to put it in our bylaws.
So a question to ask you is, when you were a pastor, if somebody came in for you to help pay the rent, did you still have to bring that to the church, or did they allow you to?
We had a fund. that
Okay, so
was
you were-
benevolence.
So kind of like you had that $500 rule where if it was up to a certain amount.
Yeah, it was a certain amount. It wasn't a
Right.
500.
Right.
The whole committee, the benevolence committee could spend up to $500.
Mhm.
And a lot of times the way we would do that is we put retired people on our benevolence committee, so we could pretty much get a hold of them anytime.
Mhm.
Hey, so-and-so's coming in the office, they need $100 to pay their light bill. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You know, and I didn't really even handle that.
Okay,
My ministry assistant would make those phone calls and they say, yeah, they said that's fine, you know, and I might get online and pay the bill for them, or I never wrote the check, have her write the check and I would take it to them or whatever it might be, but yeah, we kind of tried to streamline that process too.
Mhm.
I wanted to reflect on something that you said so that they'll understand, the reason for it is if your bylaws say that you have a business meeting at a certain amount of time, and then you have a business meeting on an off time or something that's not according to those bylaws, then someone in the church can come back and say, well, none of that's legitimate because you didn't follow the bylaws. And so if it's in the bylaws, you need to follow it.
Oh,
And
wow.
If not, they can come back and say that was not officially voted on properly because it wasn't done within the boundaries of what we voted on.
Wow.
And so, and I mean, that can cause some big issues in the church. And the only reason I say this because I've seen it.
Yeah.
You know,
People, if they're pushed in a corner, that sometimes will look for every option
Right.
that they have, and that's one of them. I mean, that's
Hey,
what bylaws do, is to try to keep you out of court, right?
right.
Well,
Right.
you know, and we try to, that's why I say you try to follow what they say, but there are times where it just doesn't fit anymore, or things are different now because of COVID, maybe, you know,
Right.
maybe it was, you're supposed to have a business meeting every quarter. Well, now you can't meet for a certain amount of time, or you don't, or people don't feel comfortable coming, you know, so maybe you have virtual meetings. Well, that's not in the bylaws. So now you need to adjust what you've got in your bylaws to allow for those kind of
Wow.
things, because people will, I mean, you know,
Has to be an amendment, is that the word?
amendment, yeah, you can amend your bylaws, that's right. To, you know, rewrite that section.
Well, matter of fact, that conversation was had, I don't know, a month or so ago. A pastor acquaintance of mine was asking about how we were talking about this church plan. He said, whatever you do, don't drive everything you do by the bylaws. And I said, wait a minute. If you're on a leadership team, it's a little, you're aware of all of them.
Right.
But all the people that sit in them pews, that's all they got. They don't have a say on a committee, or they don't have a say in all this. And something that was so apparent to me was, if you're not gonna operate by the bylaws, why do you even have them? Because,
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you
We
have,
don't have any right now.
right,
We
but
haven't
if
written
you,
them yet.
if you have 500 people sitting in the congregation, and you have 75 or 60 people in your leadership, that means 440 of them, that's all they have. They don't have a say in anything else.
Right.
And it really struck me funny that he would say, well, don't be nitpicking your bylaws, you know? Why would you have them if you?
Well, I probably, in his defense, would be something along the lines of, try to be as specific as possible, but as general as, as allowed, so that you
Right.
can have a little bit of leeway, because
Right.
you don't want to be bound by, we've got to do it this way, so, wording in your bylaws that would say, well, like a quorum, having enough people to be able to conduct business. A lot of times in bylaws, at least in the past, it might say, well, you've got to have a percentage of your active members or your membership in general present and voting to be able to have a quorum, to be able to have a business meeting. Well, all the churches that I was a part of, I mean, I did everything I could. We had a meal, so that, hey, at least they had something to look forward to, and while they're full and happy, then you have a business meeting. That was always my kind of secret. It was like, when they're eating dessert, they're not gonna be fussing, And so I would always start the business meeting before they got to dessert, and then they'd get dessert, and boy, they would really be happy. But we get away with that kind of wording when we redid our bylaws, because it was just those who are active members and who are present can enact business. So whether it was, you don't want it to be this way, but whether it was 2 people or whether it was 200 people, business could be voted on, because you had to be able to provide for
You
operation.
don't want to impede the Holy Spirit, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name.
Yeah.
There he is.
Right.
And so, it shouldn't be based just on numbers. It should be on the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Well, that's the business meeting. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
If you
So,
go to a couple of churches, you gotta have 911 on speed dial, because somebody is getting
And Randy, in some churches, they want what's gonna be on the agenda
yes,
Yeah.
posted the week before.
that's right.
And if you don't get what you want on that agenda, it cannot be brought up in that business meeting. So that people are prepared.
Mhm.
And
And
that's
watch a school board meeting is exactly that same way. You cannot bring it up at all if it's not in the agenda.
right, and there is a plus to that.
You can have public comment
Right.
and you can have new business, but it can only be brought up. It can't be voted on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so those things are not necessarily bad.
Yeah, when that church, North Park Baptist Church, where I started my ministry as a part-time youth minister, that's what they did.
Mhm.
You had to have, if you wanted something on the agenda for that business meeting, it had to be in the pastor's hands 2 weeks before, and then it was in a bulletin the week before to show this is what we're gonna be talking about. And then on that particular Wednesday night, we had the business meeting, or Sunday night, I don't remember when they had theirs. Then you could discuss that, and then you could bring up anything you wanted, but it had to be put on the table, so to speak, until next business meeting.
Right.
To be able to be discussed, so.
I can't help but think, sometimes I think they do that to protect the pastor. Because if you have a anti-pastor crowd come
Yep.
in,
That's right.
and they can bring up their agenda.
Yep.
The pastor doesn't want,
Right.
that's when you have that church split.
Yep.
So,
They can bring up anytime they want. I think we need a new pastor.
that's right.
Yeah, and they can vote on it right then.
Well, and it also keeps, a whole group that wants to kind of push something through. Shows up with enough people to get the vote and then present it, and now they've got a whole crowd to vote on it. By doing the agenda, it lets everybody know, well, why are they bringing that? So then that brings, it's just a safeguard.
It is, and I never did that at home.
Oh,
We
I
never,
didn't either.
I never did feel the need that had to be there.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I saw it in action, where an issue was brought up in a meeting. Well, I think this needs to be voted on by the church. Fine, we'll call a special business meeting. we call it a special business meeting. Now, I'm telling you what,
People come out. of the-
I've never seen these people in 6 months, a year, 2 years, and guess what? They're there to vote on it that day. Somebody from that group that wanted it to go a certain way, brought their kids home from college.
That's right.
Who voted on it?
happens.
Well,
To be sure they voted in the way they wanted it to go, and sure enough, it passed. So I said, man, if I'd known we were politicking on this, I'd make a few phone calls, that kind of thing. But I trust.
Doesn't Robert Rules of Order though, say that if the moderator can help with an adjournment at any time? And that way you can avoid that kind of situation where all of a sudden there's certain mayhem maybe going on and, okay, we need to adjourn and discuss what's going on.
Sometimes you can, what they call table.
I was gonna say, you can call for, but I don't think the moderator can call for an item to be tabled. Somebody from the congregation or has to be able to call for that.
The hard thing about it is most churches, in your bylaws is where it'll say it, who is the moderator, and
Yeah.
90% of the churches I know, the pastor is the moderator. But the moderator doesn't get a vote.
Right.
So it's a weird dynamic, it's not necessarily bad, but it's.
But then in the other parts of the church, there are other churches who appoint a different
Mhm.
moderator. Like
what
the
is
chairman of the
that? What is a
deacons,
moderator?
like the person leading the meeting. Yeah,
He keeps the
Yeah.
order.
keeps the order.
But that person doesn't have a vote.
No. And can't make a motion.
And
Can't say, well, I think we need to do this, or, now you can say, Carl, would you come up and be moderator? And I'm gonna step over here, now I'm gonna say something as not the moderator.
Can you do that?
Yeah, you can,
But he still don't get a vote, most.
Oh, I was gonna say, let's
pastor-
pause real quick.
the
yeah.
pastor doesn't get a vote.
It's not the
Tag
best.
team, yeah. Yeah. Now, there are times when, I was asked, well, what do you think, Pastor? And I'm
Right,
like, okay,
right.
well, I'm not speaking as the moderator, I'm speaking as, Randy Evans, who's a member of this congregation, this is what I think. And then we go back into the business, so it's really just to keep order, it's just to keep organization, be consistent with things. Robert's Rules of Order, you mentioned that, that's kind of the guiding document, and I do have a copy of that, and we can hand those out at the break or something, but I also have a little sheet here about how to conduct a business meeting. It just has some basic, things that we've kind of talked about too. I've also, go ahead,
Correct me if I'm wrong with the Robert's Rules of Order, there's the gigantic,
that's right,
but there's also a simple version that you use.
yeah, and this is a
the smaller churches.
way simpler, this is just the real broad principle, so. Just to give somebody who doesn't have any idea, Robert's Rule of Orders is the accepted standard for for leading a business meeting. And so it gives you what to say, what to do, what does this mean?
And actually, your bylaws should say that. Your bylaws say we're gonna go follow the Robert's Rules of Order.
It should say that,
Yes,
if you're going to do it. But if you're not going to do it, then it shouldn't say that.
right.
But yeah, the bylaws in Holland, we said, as best we can, we're gonna follow the Robert.
And that's your key phrase to keep things from being concrete,
Yeah.
as best we can, we're gonna follow your, or,
Be a little more fluid,
when you make something rigid.
Then you get in trouble.
Right,
So I have those, I have, how to conduct a business meeting, I also have just my little outline that that I put together that I use for every business meeting that I ever conducted. It's just, this is what I go in and just change, the things that we were talking about, so you're welcome to take any or none of that, for sure.
I think Randy would agree that another reason for it is because when people know what to expect, and there's at least, I'm not talking about being rigid and so formal that, but there ought to be some uniformity and consistency in the way you do it. And then as new people come in, they kind of see how you operate and things will flow that way. So it's not being legalistic, if you don't have some order or some flow to it, and every meeting will just be chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most
Right.
of them are anyway.
Exactly.
Well,
They can be, you know.
But you see, the other thing too is that if everybody is agreeing to follow a certain order, and somebody tends to get outside of that, the majority will correct it, usually.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Otherwise, got a cage match.
I don't know what Baptist churches y'all went to, but we don't do cake tonight.
It's gotten to that point yet.
I've seen some heated, I've never been a part of I've never had to lead a meeting contentious, never had to lead a, meeting that was arguing or fussing or people leaving mad. I never, thankfully, never had that.
Crazy stuff.
But I've heard lots of stories, and church that I grew up in, I remember a couple of really contentious meetings and just how uncomfortable that was and how, I felt sorry for our pastor, and I loved him. And, he was just being raked over the coals over stuff that he really didn't have a lot of control over. So, and I saw people leave, I did see people leave meetings, the church made a decision. We voted on a particular, direction, and it was theological in nature. I mean, it was, you can't teach outside of these parameters and be a Sunday school teacher in our church. And all of those people marched right out and said, we'll never be a part of this church again. And it was sad to see that as a 15-year-old kid, but at the same time, I voted to say, yeah, that's what we believe, and that's what we're gonna be teaching. If you teach otherwise, then you can't be in the leadership. So it's tough. It is tough to be in charge and be the leader, because there are some tough decisions sometimes, and you have people that may or may not want to follow underneath that thing. So thankfully I never had to be that person. All right, any other questions on business meetings? I mean, we're not, like I said, we're gonna spend a lot of time on that. All right. So the other part of what I'm responsible for is really budgeting and financial accountability, those kinds of things in your syllabus. That's what I'm supposed to be talking about. And so we're going to move the financial planning and spending, or creating, administering a budget in a church setting. But before we do that, I want you to consider a minister's personal finance, because I think I've known far too many people in the ministry who live kind of knotted up inside because their personal finances are a mess. Now, part of that, I mean, you can blame it on the church. Part of that is they don't get paid what they should, and that's unfortunately very true, very common, that a minister in a small church, or even some medium-sized churches, don't make as much as someone who works outside the church, who has the same maybe education or experience. They're going to make a lot more, and it's just the way it is. There's not a lot to do about that. You hope that I was always very fortunate to have churches who paid as well as they could, and it was always enough for us as a family. It was always enough. Could it have been more? Yes. Would it have been easier? Certainly. But we always had what we needed, and the church was always going above and beyond as they could, with personal gifts and food, and just being good people, good Christians taking care of their pastor. And I always appreciated that. But as far as the minister is concerned, the pastor is concerned, or the leader is concerned, personal finance is of utmost importance, and maintaining and controlling your finances, managing your finances, stewarding your finances is just vital to be able to not have that stress on top of the already stressful job that you have as a minister. So, if you're married, then probably one of you is kind of naturally going to be a saver, wants to save money. The other person is going to be probably a spender. And the spender, just kind of red flag here, the spender should not be in charge of your finance. Okay? You shouldn't be in charge of your finance. Now, there can be a transformation in a spender's life, and I'm here to tell you it's true because I was the spender in my marriage relationship for many years. I grew up in a very modest, middle-class kind of family. Both my mom and dad worked, they both had a good job, but we never talked about money. You know, we never talked about money. They never thought about money that I remember. So, so I never knew what it was like to not have money, I guess. I mean, I didn't have everything I wanted for sure, but I know that I never had anything or didn't have anything I needed, right? Now, my wife grew up in a very, very different situation, only a single income family. Her dad was a carpenter. Things were always very tight, always very tight. And her mom stayed home with the family, with my wife and her two siblings. She, again, never went without, but her family, they didn't do some of the things that we did, you know, take family vacations. Not, my parents didn't take me to Disneyland or Disney World. They actually went to Disney World, but it was after they dropped me off at college. And I'm not kidding.
Hey,
They left me in Texas and they said, "We're going to Florida." And they went to Disney World, right? They were going to see my dad's brother who lived in Florida, but they were told somebody.
That's the way you.
And so, you know,
That's awesome.
we always wanted to go to Disney World. We went to see that same uncle and aunt who lived in Florida when I was a kid, probably. I mean, I can remember it. I was at least, had to be around 5 or 6 years old. I was about 10 years old. And we begged my dad, can we go? You know, Orlando was just like 4 hours away from where we were. Well, can we go? Your mom was like, yes, let's take the kids, you know, and Dad was like, nah, we gotta get back on, I gotta make it work, whatever it was. But they did. So I didn't always get what I wanted. But now my wife, you know, so when we went on family vacation, it was literally to see family, right? That was our family vacation, was to see other family, because that's just what you did.
If you get out of the house, that was a vacation.
That was a vacation, yeah, exactly. And I loved it. Enjoyed it. But my wife, they didn't do that. They didn't go out there. We went out to eat once a week. Anybody ever know of Furr's Cafeteria? Yeah. That we went to Furr's Cafeteria once a week. And on Friday night, usually with some friends, and it was all you could eat buffet. And so
Special dessert.
got dessert. Oh yeah, millionaire pie, my favorite. And so my wife, their treat was to go to Pizza Hut, not to eat there, but to have pizza. They went and brought it. They didn't have it delivered to their house. They went and got it and brought it home, and to have pizza and breadsticks. That was a treat. So, you know, they didn't have cereal. They didn't, I mean, they just grew up with very limited amount. They ate, we call them, you know, brown beans, red beans, pinto beans, whatever you want to call it. They ate pinto beans with every meal. If they were having sandwiches, they had pinto beans. If they had hamburgers, they were having pinto beans. When I got into their
Well,
family,
they have to get that protein from somewhere.
well, exactly, they didn't raise their own cattle, but they, both my father-in-law and mother-in-law had, parents that raised cows. So they had fresh beef. And they were very generous people. But when I got into their family, you know, it's like, I mean, I asked my wife, do y'all eat beans with every meal? And she's like, yeah, doesn't your family? I'm like,
Your wife is.
no, she's not. I know your dad. You know, and so it was just like, so when we got married, what did we have? We had
Beans.
hamburgers and beans, and we
And
had spaghetti and beans. No, we didn't have spaghetti and beans, but we had, you know, and so I would be like, can we have something else? I love them, I do, but I just. Fair enough. So we grew up very different. Now, my wife's family for Christmas was, you know, they went over and above. They gave kids so many gifts. Now, it was typically clothes and things like that, but it was a lot for them. They really went extra. So you kind of get the idea of how different we were growing up. So my wife and I were very opposites. She was the one who was a saver, you know. When we first got married, I made $50 a week, as that part-time student minister. And she was a part-time professor, a secretary for a professor at our university. And she was the one responsible with our money. Thankfully, the church that I worked for had a parsonage. We lived in it, very modest, small, little 3-bedroom house, but for us, it was like a mansion. Our idea though of a spending plan was when our checkbook got to zero, we stopped spending money. I mean, that was just the way it worked. I mean, we didn't know anything about how to handle money. I didn't, she didn't. She knew not to spend too much. I wanted to spend all the time. So we decided we needed to do something different. I bought a ledger book, a pencil and paper, and we, she, not me, wrote out the ledger. This is what we're gonna spend on this, that, we read a copy of a book called How to Manage Your Money. As a Christian book, one of the earliest Christian writers on handling money, a man named Larry Burkett. And so he helped us kind of shape this idea of what it means to be a good steward. And I remember, I'm dating myself here. We bought some software, to do this budgeting when it first came out on 3.5-inch, floppy disks, right? And gosh, it was horrible. It didn't work. And so my wife, she did all she could. We finally were introduced to a man named Dave Ramsey. Anybody know Dave Ramsey?
Yeah.
That name? Okay.
Yep.
Some of you know him, and it's a curse word, and some of you know him, and it's a blessing. I love Dave Ramsey. We went just 2 weeks ago to his SMART conference in Dallas, and man, I learned so much, and I've been following the man all my life, and for a lot of years, since I was probably about 30 years old, so 20 some odd years. But he introduced us to not just stop spending when you get to zero, but a zero-based budget. And so you take all the money that you have, that that's coming in for the month, and then you tell it where you want it to go, and you've got to get to zero. If it's zero before you get to all of the categories, then you got to figure out how to rearrange everything. But you spend it, he always says, you spend it on purpose on paper. Before the month begins, you're having this budget as a personal budget. And so we've been doing that for, again, 20 plus years. I was introduced to him by a cousin of mine, and, we just never looked back. And so kind of his philosophy is my philosophy now. And it revolves around, personal finance revolves around 3 aspects: planned giving, planned spending, and planned saving, right? So giving, spending, and saving, but planning all of those things: giving, spending, and saving. So this could be coupled with the plan. So planned giving is part of the planned spending, that's, technically. But I separate it as pastors and church leaders. I believe, are to set the example for the church in our giving. Yeah, you can get that out. It'd be great. So when I say planned giving for the Christian, that means, I think, tithing, right? That means giving to your local church. It means taking God's part off of the top before you spend any other money.
That's right.
And so now, somebody who's not a Christian might look at this monthly cash flow plan and say, well, giving to me means, giving to the Red Cross, or giving to the Salvation Army, or giving to whatever organization that they like or support or whatever. But for the Christian, I believe it needs to be the church, and especially as leaders in the church, we are to be setting an example. Now, I never, as a pastor, had anyone say, well, Pastor, how much do you give a month? I never had anybody ask that. They didn't say, well, what percentage of your check do you give to the Lord? They never asked that. I believe they probably assumed I was giving 10%, and I was at least giving that much or more. And so they didn't know what I gave, and I never knew what they were giving. Never asked, never wanted to know, didn't want to have any kind of feeling of, now some people were like,
Administration knows.
well, they do. Yeah. And so when we had to hire a new ministry assistant, that was one of the first things, was like, hey, you're going to know what everyone gives, or more importantly, what they don't.
What I don't do.
You know, because you probably know about what they make as a superintendent of schools. And you know what he or she gives as a tithe to that, of that, and probably, you know, is that the same? I don't know.
They never asked me, Randy, but in our bylaws, if you were on ministerial staff, you signed an agreement that you were gonna give 1% of your income.
Really?
At least.
Wow.
If you were on paid, or, no, just on ministerial staff. You were gonna, now, we never checked on nursery worker or anything like that, but if you were worship leader, youth pastor, you know, associate pastor, or the pastor, you agreed to 10% of your income back to the church.
Who checked on that?
That's a good question, but they know what I made.
Yes, I mean, yeah,
So I wrote a check,
right. Yeah. Yeah,
so there was no question.
that's right. I had a youth minister one time that I didn't know what he gave. I wasn't sure he was giving anything.
Mhm.
And so I asked, my ministry assistant, I said, now I don't wanna know specifically, but how much has he given? Or, you know, has he been giving regularly? No, I don't show any record of him giving anything.
Mhm.
I went to him and I was like, listen, you're full-time staff member. We do expect that the minister tithe, and we said that in the
Mhm.
job description, you know, not just support, but tithe. And he said, well, I've been giving cash in the plate. I'm like, well, you can't do that anymore. You need to write a check,
It's like,
because,
I mean, you can catch.
You know,
dollars.
was he? Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. He may have been given over and above the 10%.
Yeah.
In cash.
The only reason that I knew was because our treasurer came to me one time, and it was the very first year that I was there, we had a female worship leader, and he came up straight to me and said, she is on paid staff here, and she is not given, we have not seen one thing go through, and I was like, well, what do you want me to do about it? And he showed me the bylaw
Oh,
and said, she's on staff here. So I went and talked to her, and she said, I give to my home church. And I had to have the same conversation. Well, you agreed to tithe. She said, I am tithing to my home church. And so her dad was a pastor. And so I said, well.
this
you
is your
agreed-
home church.
This is your home church
Yeah.
now, because you're a member. So she did comply, but I had to do it, but they came to me.
Yes,
Why? Because I'm the administrative leader.
right.
You know how to talk to people.
Yeah, well, they didn't
No,
want
because
to.
they didn't.
They didn't, that's the truth. They didn't want to.
Yeah.
Well, you know, so I believe in tithing. I believe in giving that tithe regularly. And, you know, and I believe God blesses us when we do. tithe.
Yes, he does.
You
Yes,
know,
it does.
Probably,
Yes.
Right. we've all, those of us who give regularly, tithe
You see
regularly,
them.
we just see
You
it.
see, yes.
Money goes further, kids don't get sick as often, tire doesn't blow out as much, or whatever, you know. The car repair didn't cost, you know, 1,000, it was 500, you know,
And
whatever.
if it was, the money was there.
Yeah, you know, there's been so many times, you know, all of us could give testimony of when God provided practical needs, so. So set the standard, 10% tithe, on your gross income, the whole package, you know, not just what you take home. And I think it needs to be a priority, but, on a more practical note, you know, I don't think you'll ever be able to challenge your people to give if you're not the one giving. You know, if you're not giving, then, you know, if people were to say, well, do you tithe? I could say, yeah, I sure do, you know, I do, and.
More
than
10.
Right, I've never had to defend that or anything, never had to produce a record or whatever. And then beyond that, so in that spending plan, you know, giving is number one. And for the Christian, it should be the church. Beyond that, it could be other ministries, you know, over and above your tithe can be supporting those other ministries. We always supported people, you know, individuals on mission who were maybe not Southern Baptist missionaries, but they were friends who asked us to help support them in missions. And so we did that, or helping people go on mission trips, supporting childcare ministries in Texas, those kinds of things. We always gave up, still do give over and above that tithe. So planned giving, gotta be there. Planned spending, again, giving is part of it, but spending more encompasses, all right, we gotta pay the bills, right? We gotta make sure that we are meeting our obligations, and I highly recommend any of Dave Ramsey's books, Financial Peace. He wrote Financial Peace. That's something that I read years ago. The Total Money Makeover is also good. It's less scripture. Financial Peace is more the biblical background of it. But still all the same biblical principles. And the primary tool that he uses is this one that I've given you, is a zero-based financial peace. Correct. Mhm.
You haven't gone screen,
The Total Money Makeover.
you haven't gone down the screen debt free?
We didn't go scream that we were debt free. But it's because of him that we have lived that way. Yeah.
I've been listening about that long.
Yeah, so, so this is the paper version. There is an online version that's free as well. It's called Every Dollar, everydollar.com. And you can do it all on, again, it doesn't cost anything. You just have to sign up for membership, but it doesn't cost anything to use their budgeting tool. And boy, I love it. Especially the online version, because it just next month it brings over last month, because most of us, we have the same bills. We're going to eat, we're going to have gas in our cars, we're going to have to pay insurance, those kinds of, right, we're going to eat and then get gas. That's what Bucky's, one of my favorite signs, eat here and get gas. Yeah, that's
And
Anyway.
being broke.
well, that too. Now, so that's his primary tool, zero-based budgeting. And that's his first piece of the system. And there's an explanation there of how to use that. It's an actual, he calls cash flow plan. Giving being the first part of that. The second, so he really focuses in on 7 baby steps. And the first step is really to get out of debt, right? To have this spending plan in place, but also to get out of debt. So getting out of debt, he talks about having $1,000 savings account, an emergency fund. So having that set up and then working on what he calls a debt snowball, paying off the smallest debt and then moving to the largest debt.
One thing that First Baptist Colleen had that I thought was beautiful, especially during COVID, was we always made sure that we saved up enough to make sure we're paid for the month that you may not get any money. But we at least had a month's worth saved up in case something happened. Of course, with COVID,
Something did.
something did happen, so.
Yeah.
Now,
Dave Ramsey calls it Murphy, Murphy repellent,
yeah.
Murphy's going to move into the spare bedroom. Something's gonna go wrong.
Even though we have like a little debt, like we try to have like 6 months.
Right, and that's
Which is
his,
gonna be great in December.
Right.
right, and that's his ultimate goal is that you have.
But we still
6
have,
months.
but we just have like a mortgage and.
Right, now he doesn't,
One car.
yeah, he doesn't consider that. So when we said get out of debt, he's talking about consumer debt,
Right,
cars,
well. we
credit cards,
have One car.
those kinds of things, getting out of that kind of debt. Because the mortgage, most people don't have the money to be able to buy a house.
Sure.
outright,
Of course.
Wish we did, right? But we don't. And so, yeah, when we say we've lived debt free for many years, it just means we don't have credit card debt, we don't have car payment. But we've had a mortgage for 12 years, and we're gonna have it for a few more,
Right.
and working toward getting out of that. So I'll just encourage you. I mean, you can Google Dave Ramsey, and gosh, he's got tons of YouTube videos, and man, they're so good. And you'll get addicted to them, I promise.
His program, that's for individuals. Is that a good program for churches?
And that's where we're going. I think it's a good, so when we talk about planned giving, we talk about planned spending, and then the actual saving part of that is what you mentioned as well in the church realm, but it's also important for the individual, you know, that you have that 6 months of expenses saved up, or 3 months, whatever it is, we kind of tend to be around that 3 month mark of having 3 months of our expenses, so that if the bottom fell out, if lost a job, if couldn't go to work, I mean, I'm on commission, so if I don't go to work, my check, I still have a check, but it's very small.
Right.
And so, you know, so if some reason, if I had, I mean, I thought about it, if I have to have surgery, if I have something like that, I don't know what it's gonna be like. I'm gonna get paid, but it's only gonna be this base salary that I make. And so that looks a lot different than what I.
My disability check is 1 trip to Houston,
Right.
so that's 4 trips short.
Right, so it gets real in a hurry then.
It gets
Yeah.
real fast.
And so to have some savings in place for those unexpected events, or even sometimes they may be a little bit expected, we know we're gonna get sick, we know we're gonna have problems.
Well, you know,
Plan saving.
you know, another reason why a church needs to save it, because let's say your roof gets hail damage.
Mhm.
Well, your insurance company will pay like 90% of it maybe, but then you're back with 10%.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any money left over, you know, you're gonna have to go through another building program to
Right.
come up with a dough.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about that, let's take a break, how about that?
Okay.
Yep, okay. I think everybody's ready.
Most of the towns, with a lot of shirted bills. They've got a huge rainy day fund and don't want to spend it.
All right, so. We talked about personal finances, right, and I do believe that that's kind of the heart, where you will be leading as a minister, leading your church, so. So I want to share with you kind of the situation that I found myself in when I came to First Baptist Church in Holland regarding financial planning, financial spending. You know, thankfully the church was on solid ground financially. There was no problems when I arrived. But when I came on staff in 2005, we had a volunteer who served as our treasurer, and there's nothing wrong with that. Most churches, that's just what you have. But she was probably at that time probably mid-40s, early to mid-40s, dedicated church member. I had worked at least at some point in the banking industry as a teller. Our church had what we called a counting committee, and so 2 church members would get together, and every Monday they would count the offering from the previous Sunday. Typically took them about an hour. It was kind of chaotic. These 2 ladies, they're wonderful ladies. They were related to one another.
Which is
What's that?
Which is usually another.
Well, you couldn't get rid of it. But then they would take that report from all that they had counted and all that and written down this, they had a little form that they followed. And they would give all of that to our church's ministry assistant, and she would put the information into the database. And the reports generated from the database were given to the treasurer, and then she would, reconcile, make sure everything, what they said came in really was, really had come in. And she would, write the checks, pay the bills, did all of our payroll in QuickBooks. Our volunteer treasurer had some experience, as I said, with finances, but not a lot. She was very faithful to do what we asked her to do. She always had my paycheck on time, which I appreciated. And it never bounced, which was always good. And the reports were always ready for, that monthly business meeting. But after about 2 years of watching the reports, I knew something needed to change. The reports always contained what people thought were errors. But when someone would ask about it, they would ask the treasurer about it, but she would say, I don't know, that's just what the computer said. That was her response. I don't know, that's just what the computer said. All right. And I remember one particular report, and it showed that our bank account as a church was overdrawn by more than $2,000.
Oh,
And then the next month, we had an excess of nearly $4,000. So that's a $6,000 swing from -2 to +4, right? But the income didn't show that. And I waited for somebody to say something. I said, any questions on the financial report? Everybody's just looking. And I knew then, I said, we've got a problem. Because they didn't want to ask the question because they knew the answer. I don't know. That's just what the computer said. That's what was gonna be the answer. And so, but you know, sometimes as a church, you ask for a volunteer and you get one. But you don't want that volunteer. And you can't get rid of them. Because you asked and they said yes. And this was the situation with this lady, you know, she was related to half the church.
Probably more than that.
Well, probably more than that. Maybe 2/3 of the church. So finally, you know, our church had a committee on committees, right? I've always thought that was kind of funny, term, committee on committees. The committee that asked people to serve on committees. And so we got to that point of the year around August and we would ask, do you want to continue as you know, this committee, that committee? The nominating committee would ask all the officers, do you want to continue being a Sunday school teacher? Do you want to continue being a treasurer? And she said, I don't want to do this anymore. Woo! We said, thank you for your faithful service. We appreciate everything that you've done. We'll take it from you. And so that was our chance for change. And I talked with our church's personnel committee about the possibility of hiring someone to keep our books. And I contacted the associational office and was referred, well, I actually contacted the associational office and I said, we need somebody to do an audit. Because here's this lady, she's been a volunteer treasurer. We've only had volunteer treasurers for as long as the church can remember, and now we're wanting maybe to hire someone. So we need an audit. We need someone to, you know, just make sure everything's ready to go for that person. And there was a man here named Claude White. He was the treasurer here at the association at the time. He was a volunteer here, but I think he was an accountant. Wasn't he called an accountant? And he says, you know, I don't have time to do that, but I've got this lady who would be more than happy, I think, to help me. Her name is Mary Ann Dodson. Anybody know Mary Ann?
Oh,
no. Okay. So I said, let me call her. So I called Mary Ann Dodson. And she said, I'm not interested in doing an audit, but if you want me to take on your books, we'll kind of do an audit as we get started. And so we hired her. December 2007, she started to kind of untangle. Have you ever been fishing, you know, and you cast a little bit off and buffaloes up on you? That's what she had to kind of do, work through all of that buffalo to try to figure out what was really going on. And so December 2007, she finally gets to the bottom and she says, I'm ready, y'all have $500 left at the end of the year. And we hadn't made payroll yet. I said, wow, okay. So we started the month with that $500 in the bank. I reported to the finance committee and then to our deacon body, and we decided that we'd just write a letter to the church and we would send it to all of our members and we would just be honest with them, informing them about our situation and encourage them to give, you know, additional funds. And so here's just a little bit of what I wrote. I said, I have enclosed a copy of September and October's financial statements. September was a good month. This is 2007, but you'll notice that October's deficit was severe. I don't know what was going on in October. Although our November financial reports are not completed, it looks like we ended the month with a deficit, less money than we needed, of $1,435.99. And I said, it's disconcerting when our general fund balance drops below $500, which it did this month. I know this is a bad time of the year to talk to people about money, but as the deacons and I discussed the situation, we felt you would want to be informed. We're not begging for money, but we would like to ask everyone to prayerfully consider your current level of giving and to remember we are never more like God than when we are giving. And our folks responded. They did, to their credit. They gave a lot of money that month, $17,591.71. Amazing. Biggest offering we'd ever gotten in the history of the church. No one could remember anything bigger than that.
Wow.
I'm sure there was a lot of I'm sure that there was a lot of, I don't wanna use the word fear, but I'm sure it took a lot for me to send some.
Oh, sure, yeah, nobody wants to be that vulnerable. You can say,
Right.
doing very
But then in the vulnerability, you just trusted God.
right.
Yeah.
Which ultimately is his responsibility, you know.
Sure.
Well, then you don't want everybody to turn around on that lady who may have in her heart felt like she was doing a good job.
Yeah.
And turn on her.
No,
you know.
absolutely not. And, Mary Ann was just that person to be able to say, this is really
Mm.
the accurate reflection. No one ever commented about our volunteer treasurer not doing a good job or anything like that. But, it was just, we didn't really know. We didn't really know where we were until she told us, this is really where you are. And, so that was a big blessing. And also just as personal testimony, I spent a lot of years at First Baptist Church Holland worrying about finances. I'm a worrier. My mom was a worrier. I picked that up very early. I worry about, every little thing. I'm just a worrier. I don't like it. I'm better than I have ever been in that area of my life to trust God more. But back in those years, early years, especially at First Baptist Church Holland, we were in a building program. We were trying to meet budget every month. I worried a lot. I mean, I laid awake at night worrying about it. And finally, after 10 years of being there. I mean, I know it was at least 10 years, maybe been more like 11 or 12. I was only there 14. But I was laying awake one night worrying about it, and the Lord said, what are you gonna do about it? You can't make people give more. You can't, you can do your part. And we'll talk a little bit about that, about being a good steward. And we tried to be a good steward of everything that we were given, but you can do that much, but you can't do anymore. It's my church. So from that point forward, I really do think it was about 10 years in, it's about 4 years. I said, I'm never going to do it again. You can ask Mary Ann if you see her. Because I would check those reports every week. Want to know where we were, how we were doing, up or down. Usually down. But, there were those up times too. And, one time Mary Ann came into my office and she was telling me kind of the current status. And she said, I'm sure you've looked at the reports. And I said, no, I haven't. She said, do what? I said, Mary Ann, I'm not going to do it. I'm not looking at those reports. You bring them to me at the end of the month. We'll look at them together. I said, but I'm tired of worrying, I just can't do it anymore. And she was shocked because, I was always like, oh yeah, I've already seen that. Yeah, I know that's coming. Yeah, I know. So that's my personal testimony.
But
So
you left out a part though.
Okay.
Randy left that church to a debt-free, over $1 million facility built over what, a 10-year period? Yeah. So, that is phenomenal. I participated in a yellow cap training in that building when you had to walk up on the platform on raw wood because they hadn't put the carpet in yet. But he led that church I know it was well over $1 million.
It was.
Debt free.
Yeah.
So that he had a lot to worry about.
I did. That's why I say it's probably about 10 years because that's how long it took to build the building.
Right.
Yeah. That I worried about everything. That's true. Well, one of the craziest examples, I think, of the situation going on in the finances at our church when I arrived is that Mary Ann, she called into question on one thing when we hired her. She says, you've got a general fund checking account. It's what we paid our bills with. We had a building fund account, checking account, because we were in a building project. And then you've got a savings account. And she says, now I also see you've got a checking account for Baptist men, Baptist women, high school youth, junior high youth, children's ministries, and a Christmas gift ministry. She's like, y'all have 9 different accounts. Bank accounts. And 6 of those, there was no oversight. They were given a particular amount of money every month, just drafted into their account, and they could write checks, do whatever they wanted with that money. That wasn't a lot of money. I mean, they, like the children's ministry got $75 a month. I mean, that's not a lot of money. You're not gonna break the bank, with $75 a month. They'd have to kind of save up that money to really do anything big, right? But she's like, that doesn't work. She said, I'm going to call in all of those checkbooks. And that's the church's money. That belongs to the church. And the church has a responsibility for all of it. And if they want to spend money, then they have to turn in a receipt. If they've already spent money to get reimbursed, or they have to come to the secretary and ask for a form to fill out and get the check. I said, great, I love this idea. Because I believe it's all God's money, right? It's not youth money over here, it's not the women's money over here, it's not the Baptist men's money, it's all of it. So can you imagine who might have had the biggest problem with that?
All
No, just one.
No, just one group.
It's always the same group.
It was the women's ministry.
The old.
They say, well, that's our money. Oh, I thought it was God's money. Well, yes, but we're in charge. I said, this is the beauty of having someone who is you're hiring to do your books.
Mary Ann.
You say, well, I'm not asking for it, check. But Mary Ann is, and she's responsible. So she got all the flack. Oh, no, we don't like Mary Ann. We don't like Mary Ann. I'm like, well, sorry, the church voted to hire her. And so this is what she said we need to do to keep ourselves out of court.
That's right. That's right.
She's in charge.
She's,
Do they, for each bank account, they charge a bank fee?
no, it's a small bank, we've always had a good relationship
So
with
you
our
didn't
bank.
save any money that way?
No, it didn't save, it wasn't saving, cost saving, it was just a accountability issue, really.
Right.
More than anything, and plus everybody was like, oh, good, I don't want this checkbook, I'm tired of dealing with this thing. And so they glad, but the ladies, they did have, and from that point forward, they always talked about, well, that's our money. And so at the end of every year, this is the only way they would agree to it, at the end of the year, if they had some money in their account left over, which they usually didn't, they usually spent it. But if they had some money left over, and the church had money in the account, like the checking account, then we would take that amount, whatever it was, $200, $100, and put it in a savings account that said Baptist women. So they got to keep their money. That was the only way they would agree to it. So I was like, fine, and there were some years where we didn't have the money. We said, sorry, it's gone. We don't have it. And it wasn't there to begin with, so.
Don't spend too much.
Yeah, and so we just went with those 3 accounts, general fund, building fund, savings account. And that centralized manner of maintaining money was really, brought about a blessing, accountability. And so, one truth that I saw over and over again through the years at Holland is that with accountability comes God's blessing. If you're being accountable, being willing to be held accountable, then God often blesses us. So I believe God blesses us when we take control of our personal finances. We talk about tithing. It shows that we're serious about being good stewards of his resources because we believe he's given it to us individually, but it also applies corporately as a church if we're being good stewards with that. So the money given to the church by God's people is not just anybody's money. It's not any one group's money. It's not even the church's money. It's God's money. And so we're responsible for being good stewards of those resources. And that's the principle that should drive everything that we do as a church regarding finances. We're called to be good stewards, good managers of the resources entrusted to us. So let's think about what that looks like practically speaking. But before we go there, any questions? so far.
I know that from years of doing youth, of course, we set a budget every year, which was usually between $6,000 and $8,000. But the common misconception was that there's $8,000 sitting in the account to run through, but
It's false.
that's false.
That's what you believe you're going to have to spend.
Right,
Doesn't
but
mean you
not
have it.
necessarily, yeah.
Yeah, I had a youth minister who turned in a budget request form one time, and I'll give those out too, but he put like, I don't know, $250,000 on it.
Huh?
That's what he was requesting. And, he's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, I can only spend whatever we have in the account. And I'm like, yeah, you got it. And I said, but we gotta make it more realistic than that.
Right.
Yeah, because you gotta add his number to the rest of the budget, and
Right.
people are gonna go, what were you thinking, preacher?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He was just
Right.
being, punk kid. He was. Good. I love him to death, still to this day, but he was just like, it doesn't really matter what I put down. Y'all are gonna give me what you think we can afford. And I said,
Right.
yeah, you're right. But we do want your opinion.
Then you
You know,
put summer camp.
We kind of want you to know
Right.
what you're thinking about spending.
I mean, I was just, like, especially with startup, there really is no budget.
It's tough. It's really
This
tough.
is our budget.
Yeah.
Well, and Randy also would, like I have pastor friends that say, there will be no designated accounts.
Mm,
And so, some churches, that's where they get in trouble, is because if you set a designated account.
Mhm.
And then something happens and you say, well, we'll just use that money.
Nope,
You can't
can't
do
do
it.
it. No.
You can't do
I mean,
it.
you can,
Well,
but you can get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, but you can get yourself in trouble. And so you've got to be careful, and a lot of churches don't understand. We had a church member and they recommended that we put in a playground. And we were excited about that. But we had a whole group, including the deacon body, that said, then we'll have to have insurance and we can't afford that, so we're not putting in a playground. So we had a church member donate $3,000 in a designated fund for playground equipment. Well, that was in like 2007. I became pastor of that church in 2011. And that fund was still sitting there
No, at
because those
$3,000.
deacons said,
No,
we're not putting in a playground. But because that money was put in and they allowed it to go through a meeting into a designated fund, it just sat there. So when I got there, I added 2,000 to it and put in 2 playgrounds, but that's a different.
different story for a different day.
But that money sat there from 2011 to 2000, I think we put those playgrounds in like 2013.
Oh, wow.
So that money sat there for a long time. So some churches refuse to do any designated funds because they can handcuff you, tie your hands.
Which designated fund is different than a budget line.
It is.
Yeah. So designated fund means it's designated for that
That's exactly right.
that project or that
Mhm.
whatever it is. That's
Right.
good. So we talked about, for personal finance, plan giving, plan spending, and plan saving. And we're gonna talk about each one of those in relation to the church as well, but I want to start with plan spending, and that's the idea of a budget. I want to walk you through a little bit about the budgeting process that I used at Holland. And the first principle that I've learned about the budgeting process is that it's not always easy. It's not always easy to make a budget. If you have a little bit of money, or if you have a lot of money, it's not easy. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. What do we cut? Or what do we not fund as much? Ministries or programs have to be cut sometimes. Sometimes ministries or programs will see their budget amounts reduced rather than raised. Everybody expects them to go up every year, but that's not always the case. So it's not always easy. Also, you need to take a realistic look at your finances, especially patterns in your giving. Now, you might not be able to do it, early on in a church start. I understand that. But each year that you have some data for, you'll grow, and better be able to understand, okay, well, this is how much we brought in last year. We can kind of expect something similar, or we've added more people, we're gonna have more money, where we believe we're gonna have more money, those kinds of things, so gathering that information year after year is vital, especially for planning the budget. And, so we had a budget meeting in November of 2007. Remember I said we ended up, that month having $500 in the bank at the end of the month to begin December with. So our finance committee had already been working since September on a budget. But we were just starting to recognize things are not as good as we thought they were, kind of a mess. And so for a lot of years, planning a budget at First Baptist Church Highland had been just basically adjusting a few numbers, from the, within the personnel, we give these people a raise or whatever, maybe increase the utility budget, or increase the maintenance budget. Our building was getting older at the time. But then we put together a budget for 2008, and, we kind of got down to it. It was really done in basically one meeting, because we just basically, adjusted these numbers. That's all we did. And I just wasn't comfortable recommending this particular budget to the church after finding out that we only have $500 in the bank. So I called an emergency meeting, the finance committee. Wasn't a pleasant meeting to have, but I knew the committee needed to understand the situation. So the budgeted amount for 2008 was going to be just a slight increase over 2007. And so we were predicting $160,000, $774 for the budget in 2007 if we met it. And the figures for 2008 were higher than that. So it was not realistic at all. And so in 2008, we met together. And this, I didn't bring a copy of this for everybody, but I put together just if I can find it. I brought into the meeting just a little quick form that I put together, and I said, proposed budget for 2007 was this, 2006 was this, 2005, 2004, 2003. So I went 5 years back and just said, this is what we proposed. And then I said, this is how much we brought in each of those years. And then I said, this was the expenses for the year. And so then I would say, well, so at the end of the year, 2007, at that point, we were $9,672. Oh, we didn't have enough to reach that budgeted amount, right? Didn't mean we didn't have, we were owing that money to anyone, but just, this is what we said we were going to spend. This is how much we actually spent. And so we didn't have enough money to fund it. Did the same for 2006, did the same for 2005, did the same. So I said, listen, folks, we're saying, let's say for 2006, our budget was $150,000, but we only brought in $141,000. And we spent $154,000. That's a problem. We're spending too much money. And so we had no realistic understanding of what we were bringing in and really what we were spending. No one had a report like this. So that meeting, we had to slash, if you want to use that term, over $20,000 out of our budget. Now, again, this is not money that we were owing anyone. It was just, realistically speaking, this is what we can expect to bring in next year. We need to get our budget in line with that. We're going to try to spend less than that in some areas, especially, but we're going to make it in line up, zero-based budget.
Right.
This is how much we're going to bring in. This is how much we're going to spend, and the difference is zero. We're not the U.S. government. We can't just keep spending money and spending money and spending money and pretending that it's never going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. So we got to that point. We've trimmed the budget, and here was the fault in our budget planning. We were just getting numbers out of the sky. And we were just saying, well, yeah, I mean, I think the youth should get $12,000 for this year. I mean, whatever. That was never the case. That we never said that. But, we just were picking, we didn't have any data. We didn't have any facts. And facts are usually your friends, right? So we didn't have the information we needed to make a good decision. So 2008, we presented a very different budget. And it was zero-based. This is what we believe we're going to bring in. You still have to trust the Lord. We're not doing away with the Holy Spirit in any of this, but we still would just want to be realistic. So 2008, we presented a budget that was very realistic. And I went back and looked at 2008 and our income exceeded our expenses that year by $3,435. So just 1 year after hiring an outside person to be our bookkeeper, our finances, we ended the year with a healthy balance. So it's not always easy to budget. You're gonna need to take a realistic look at your finances as much as you can. And then also planning a budget needs to be intentional. Lots of research, lots of prep work needs to be done so that whoever's making that decision, whether it's a committee or whether it's a leadership team or whatever, has all the information they need available. We did budget workshops. And so we would just get the finance committee together and we would bring the report from Mary Ann, whatever the current month was. This is where we are. She always had an outline for us. This is what we brought in this month. These are all the expenses. This is what you got left over, or this is what you don't have left over. And then for the year to date, those kind of things. And then we could run out a report for the 5, 6 years or however long we wanted. And I always brought all of that information with me into the meeting, because, and this was just me, but I felt like the pastor, even though we had a chairperson of the finance committee, I still ran all the budgeting meetings. I just felt like I'm the chief steward, right? And so I would lead those meetings. We would talk about it together as a committee. One thing that we kind of implemented was just a budget request form. I mentioned that a while ago with that youth minister who put, some outlandish amount on there, but, I just gave out these forms to all the ministry leaders and said, I usually filled in, your current year budget was this is how much you've spent, and what do you want for the next year? What do you believe God's leading you to spend in this area? So Baptist women got one, Baptist men, the youth, the children, music minister, the personnel committee had one for all the personnel. We just had it all, and then we would bring those to that budget workshop to say, okay, this is what they're requesting. Now, there was no guarantee they were going to get that, because we may not have that money. Or we may say, well, gosh, we gave them $700 last year, but they only spent $200.
And now they're requesting 9.
But they're requesting more, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we'd say, well, we're gonna leave it the same, we're gonna drop it a little bit, and so.
When you were interim pastor, did you have that same philosophy where you felt you had to still be like the steward?
No, when I was interim pastor at that little bitty church, I was just there to preach for him. It wasn't a true interim, where I didn't have any responsibilities financially.
The same way
Yeah,
in that situation.
Now, if I was a true interim, where I'm there to help them in all responsibilities, I would take on that responsibility, and I may not lead the meeting, but I would be there. And I would make sure that I'm helping them. Are they planning appropriately for the future? So, but they just wanted somebody that they didn't have to keep finding somebody to come preach for. Yeah.
And even if you're a church plant, after a few years, we would hope that it wouldn't happen, but it always does. You're eventually going to somewhat level out where you can see some consistency. When I first went to Moffitt, my second month, we were negative 4,000. Because they hadn't been used to paying a pastor, so we were like negative 4,000. But the first year that I was there, we doubled in size. And so the people who were in charge of helping to make the budget were kind of going ballistic, because they were like, we're spending money like crazy on stuff like paper goods, toilet paper, but when you double in size, and you have a potluck, you've got twice as many plates, twice as many forks, twice as much water. And so creating a budget for the first 2 or 3 years that I was there was very difficult.
Yeah.
And they weren't used to seeing such increases in spending. But when you're seeing those increases in the income as well, you've always, so we kind of lived on, at the end of the month, did we take in more than we spent? Then let's rejoice. We'll worry about the budget. You know, it was just hard to make a budget on that.
Which is exactly like you said,
Mhm.
from the beginning, it's hard.
But
Until you gather some,
yeah, and then we begin to kind of level out, you know, and which I wish we wouldn't have, I wish we could have kept on, you know, increasing, but you will eventually, you know, kind of level off with income versus expenses after you've got a couple of years. Then you can do like you were talking about, see a realistic amount that was spent and gauge that by what's coming in and what you want to spend the next year, but
well, and in
it's
a,
hard.
and in a church plan type situation, or a new church start, or a small church. It may be, if this is the first budget you're making, it may be more of a month by month cash flow type plan.
Right.
You know, here's what we brought in, how we're gonna spend it. Here's what we brought in last month, we can expect maybe the same this month, you know? So it may be more of a month by month deal until you gather in enough data to be able to do it. And one of the things that I did, and this has probably fed my worry a little bit, I guess. But I had a pastor friend who was a Methodist pastor there in town, remember Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chris was a good friend of mine, loved Chris to death. And
Tiny bird.
yeah, he was different, but I loved him, he was just a great fellow. And we were talking about, you know, when pastors get together, we talk about, well, how's your church doing, we talk about money a lot. And he says, well, you know, I keep track of what we bring in each week, and, you know, I got this spreadsheet, and I was like, oh, I'd like to have a copy of that, and so he sent me a copy of it. And so from that point forward, from, gosh, I don't even know, I think this is, I have several of these, so I guess this is just 7-year period, 2012 to 2019, but I know I have one from like 2005 to 2012 as well. So I just kept track of general fund, you know, what do we bring in that week? And, you know, then it would total for me, and then it kept, you know, running total for the quarter, for the year, and then I would compare it, you know, last year to this year. And so that was just me personally. I would just take the report that Mary Ann brought me, and I would plug in my numbers and track it that way. And I would take this into the finance committee meeting when we were discussing budgeting, and I would be like, well, here's, you know, a 7-year period, and here's the average of what we brought in for the first quarter of the year, you know. And for that 7-year period, you could see what was the lowest, and you could see what was the highest. And, you know, typically on a, you know, summer, in that summer quarter, you know, after between June and the next quarter, which is at the end of September, you know, you might see a dip because people would not be in place during the summer. They wouldn't, you know, for some reason people think if you don't come, you don't have to give, but we would just track that. We would just kind of know, all right. And then we got to where we would understand that, let's say in April, at one point we were paying for our insurance every quarter. So in April,
Right.
and then June, and then, you know, September and December, right? So we were paying quarterly payments. And we'd be like, gosh, how come our expenses are so high in these months? Well, look at it. We're paying our quarterly payment on our property insurance. You know, all the insurances that we had were on a quarterly payment plan. And so, oh, okay, so let's plan for that, you know, so, or we would expect that to have some higher months of expense because of that.
Then you can divide that up into 12 months on your books, even though you're only paying it.
Yes, and we did. We learned to do that, you know,
Right.
to say, okay, well, we know that it's high on this quarter, you know, these 3 months, but we're gonna, you know, we're planning for it the whole year, you know.
The other thing this class taught me, the church planning center classes was, if you're in a more of a upper middle to upper class church. So December in the churches I've been in has always been a low giving month.
Mhm.
And it's because if you're in a lower income, that's Christmas time, that's holiday
That's
time.
hard.
And so people tend to not give. If you're in an upper class church or, you know, more affluential church, they're looking for tax write-off. So they tend to give more at the end of the year because it's gonna affect their taxes. Now, that's usually the bigger,
Yeah, we never had that.
yeah, we never had that issue either.
I mean, we, you know, Mary Ann would always say, well, now, you know, they have to have their money in by the end of, you know, December 31st, it'll be postmarked by the 31st, and I'm like, Mary Ann, that never happened.
That never happened.
We don't have that,
Right,
but she was used to bigger churches where that did happen. We're
Right.
like, that'd be nice, but
right.
not expecting it.
So you know what, being a former RS guy, you know, I had my friends and I said, well, if you have the cash, if you wanna get over the standard deduction, you go ahead and double up on your giving at the end of the year, so you can get over that standard deduction.
Right.
You know, it just means that the church needs to know that they're not gonna get any more money from you the rest of the year. At least you got over that standard deduction. That might be good.
I see. Well, now they've taken that away from us.
Right.
Doesn't really matter. Well, so one of the things that Mary Ann helped us with, and I don't have a copy of my former, or of our old budget, but used to, we would just have basically a 2-page budget, you know. Just all the categories front and back, and how much it was last year, how much it's gonna be this year. And Mary Ann brought to me a form, and I've got a copy for everybody that wants one, but. And this was from, Mary Ann brought it to me, and so she said, I encourage you to use this format. Okay, so I did, I just started, and I put it together myself, I put it in the computer, and I put all the numbers in it every year. Again, maybe because I'm a little bit controlling, maybe because I'm a perfectionist, maybe because I'm the chief steward, but all of those things for sure. So I just did it, and she said, after we had done it a couple of years, she said, you know what, you're the first pastor that I've given that to that actually did it. I was like, well, Mary Ann, you said we were supposed to do it, I'm gonna do it. And so she's like, well, that's great. And actually, I found out it came from Tom Henderson, he's the one who put it together originally. So it's just a format, and I kind of stapled it to where you could look at it across the page, you know, where you had what was gonna be spent in particular categories. This happens to be the pastoral ministry, so personnel, part-time student ministry, deacon ministry, funeral, meals, honorariums, the lead pastor. And it just broke down how much of the budget, percentage of the budget it was gonna be, what each line item was, and then on the other side was an explanation. This is why we're spending this money, where it's going. And, you know, so we produce this every year from 2009, maybe, on to, this is the last one that I did while I was there, was 2019, but, people loved it. It cut down on a whole lot of questions, because, you know, when you come to vote on a budget, they'd be like, well, how come we're spending, $400, what, in this, what's this staff and volunteer appreciation gifts? Well, look right across the page. Fund occasional gifts to recognize staff and volunteers for significant contributions to the life and ministry of our church. Oh, okay. So they take that home, I give it to them a month in advance, and they could look at it, read through it, scrutinize it, and give me some good. Look at every line, they add all the numbers up if they want to. Then we had 2 sessions where they could come and ask questions of our finance committee. And one was after church on a Sunday morning, one was on a Wednesday night, and, you know, guess what? Nobody came. No one ever showed up, never had a question. And then this is how I voted on so our bylaws said we had to vote on the budget the first Sunday of the month in December at the end of a regular service. So it had to be a special called business meeting. It had to be at the end of a morning worship service. And so I would say to people when we handed these out, now you're gonna have 2 weeks to look at this or 3 weeks to look at this. We're gonna have 2 sessions. We would tell them when it was, and you come and ask any questions you have. But when we present it on Sunday, December the 7th, there will be no time for questions.
Amen.
And so when we got to that day, we'd say, you've been given a copy of the budget. If you haven't, then you can get one afterwards. Do I hear a motion that we approve this as presented? And the same man who always said he brought the motion, and then the same man always seconded that motion. And then I would say, as we said when we presented the budget originally, there is not going to be any time for questions, so we're ready to vote. All in favor of affirming this budget as our, spending plan for the next year. Say aye, raise your right hand, say hallelujah, whatever it was. I wanted to give them, sometimes I had them stand up. I had an old deacon who said, you should tell them to stand up, pastor, because if they stand up, then that means they're gonna have to support it. Well, guess what? No, it doesn't. But they would vote on it with no questions. And I learned that the hard way. Because if you open that up for questions, you're gonna get some questions. And how come the nursery worker is not making more money than she was last year? Well, she is, but the budget just didn't go up, And, there's always some little nitpicky something or another they wanted to ask questions about. And everybody wants to go watch the Dallas Cowboys or get home for lunch or whatever it was. And so we just did away with questions.
But the other
Oh,
reason,
we can get one?
Yeah, I've got copies. Carl, did you make copies of these?
if I didn't, I can get you copies.
Okay.
Is that the one that's like 20 pages long?
Yeah,
No, I did not,
okay, well,
but.
he'll make you, I mean, you can have this one, but,
One thing I wanted to say was the reason, another reason is the transparency.
yes,
And I always believe that if people know where their money's going, then they're willing to continue to give and spend it.
I think so too.
And so, like, in some of the questions, it's not that they're not legitimate.
No,
It's just that they can be answered, through the people going home and reading it, because we were in a meeting one time and one of the deacons stood up and said, why in the world are we spending $400 on decorations? Well, the lady that was the head of the decorating team, she stood up and said, because I've been in this church since I was a little girl, and we've got the same decorations since I've been a little girl. And she said, so we're gonna get 4 seasons,
That is valid. Yeah.
we're gonna get 4 seasons in Christmas, and then after that, we can let your kids grow up with the same decorations for 40 years. And he said, okay, and sat back down.
he was sad
He was satisfied, but if it would have been,
in paper.
it would have never, she got kind of offended.
Sure,
He asked a legitimate question.
right,
But her reason was legitimate too.
correct.
But the tension wouldn't have been there if it would have been in something like that,
So,
so,
well, and the big thing was always the salary increases.
yeah.
Some people want to know why we were paying the pastor more. And some people wanted to know why we weren't paying the nursery worker. That was always one. And
That's
she was,
their niece,
well,
if you were in Holland.
at one time it was. But we always had this one particular lady, Miss Marino, Miss Marino. And she was faithful. She was there every Sunday, still there today. She's still the nursery worker. She's 85, I think. And still a custodian. And, just, man, wonderful person. And they wanted to be sure that she was adequately,
Right.
compensated for the work she was doing, and definitely deserved every bit of the money that we paid her, and more. She deserved more. But so I always was making sure, this is a 9% increase, or never that much, 3% increase, for Miss Marino and the nurse, and then we had, a lot of them had teenagers that helped in the nursery, and they wanted to be sure they were being paid too. So, yeah, so I would put it in black and white in paper, because then, that one person who always asked the question about the nursery worker had it answered before. And then that very first time when we had those little sessions where they could ask questions, I think she did come and ask if we were paying the nursery worker more. Yeah. So, so that form I think is invaluable. I had that form, like I said, that I tracked all the expenses, or that we tracked all of our expenses. I tracked all of our giving. Mary Ann brought in to us a thing called the check request form. Now, this one, I stole it and used it for our volunteer fire department because I'm the treasurer there now. And so, they have to fill out one of these now too. So anytime I spend money, whether it's on a church credit card or I
That's the.
requested a check, I had to take one of these, fill it all out, how much I spent, what it was for, what budget line it came out of,
Did you
sign
alter,
it, and heck,
did you alter it other than the logo?
no,
Okay, that's the form, Gary.
Yeah, this is the form that we used and she gave us. She said, this is what you have to have with every receipt. And if you don't have one of these with the receipt, you don't get reimbursed.
Oh.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
you have to have it in by Wednesday at 10 o'clock.
You had to have, I had to have all my stuff in before the end of the month, for sure. You know, and I usually went into the end of the month and I would give her every, you know, and there were times where I lost a receipt and she's like, that's fine this time.
Next time.
The next time, one, you either lose your credit card, I mean, like, you don't have the credit card, you don't get to use it. You don't lose it, or you just don't get reimbursed if you spent your own money. Okay, that, you know, we have a youth minister, same youth minister that I've been giving examples all along. He couldn't keep a receipt, he's like, well, it's somewhere in my car, maybe it blew out, I don't know. I'm like, well, then you need to take a picture of it with your cell phone.
Hello,
Colton,
When you
that's like. so
leave
easy.
Walmart. And you can print that out and give it to Marion. But she finally just had to sit down with him and say,
Yeah, because
Get
that's
it
ain't
if
good.
you don't get this together,
Yeah, because that's ain't good to go, because we don't know, you know, the IRS doesn't know. What do you do with that money?
nope. If it
So,
doesn't
you
have,
know, so it's like.
if you don't have a paper trail,
Right.
you might as well forget it, right?
Right.
And so she was a stickler and
They hired her at 3C and they
they couldn't take it.
They couldn't take it.
There were several churches that hired her and said, I think we're fine on our own, because they just couldn't do this.
in between her and my wife, sometimes I'm like, I'm looking for that receipt, okay?
Now, I'm the one in my family who's like, where's the receipt for this expense?
Take a picture.
Yeah.
There it goes. Good. Put it in your billfold and you know exactly where.
It prints out later.
So this form is, I think, invaluable. And while I'm working with our new fire chief in town, I've got to have one of these and I've got to have a receipt just telling me that you bought fire station supplies is not gonna work. I need to know what it is.
Who's the new fire chief?
Joey Perez.
Joey Perez.
I know, no comment.
Nah, don't get in
No,
politics.
no comment.
No politics here.
Oh, that kid grew up at my house. I
Yeah.
feel bad for him.
So some practical tips, have a good accounting program. We were using
There you
QuickBooks when I arrived. I use QuickBooks at work. I hate QuickBooks. I don't think it's good for churches. It's way too business oriented. When we hired Mary Ann, she used a software called Power Church. We adopted that and that was the second best decision we made financially as a church. One, hiring Mary Ann, two, shifting to Power Church.
She don't give you a choice.
Well, she doesn't. I mean, you know, we were using a different church-based database for all of our database stuff, and then we had QuickBooks for our finances. And they didn't talk to one another, and she's like, you need to do away with both of those and just go to Power Church and do everything there. And so we did, and it was the best decision we made. So you gotta have a good program. Doing it by hand is fine, but it's hard. In that budget, there's a line item that Mary Ann made us put in there. And it's called miscellaneous. It's called miscellaneous. And she said, you need to have a miscellaneous fund. You need to put some money in the budget for miscellaneous. And she said, because there's always going to be something that doesn't fit somewhere else when you spend it. And when you come to the end of the year, you bring out this report. He would show me the report. And so I learned how to print it out. And she would say, you take this report, it's called an account detail report. And so I would print the account detail on miscellaneous. And we would look at whatever we spent in miscellaneous. And we would ask, do we now need to put this in as a regular budget item? Is it something we're going to spend regularly? Or is it just going to be once in a blue moon? Because it can stay in the miscellaneous, it's fine. But like, we used to always put our piano tuning, we had to tune the piano, we would just put it in miscellaneous. Well, you know, after about 3 or 4 years, we're like, hey, we tune the piano at least once a year, maybe twice. We need a line item for this, so we started putting it in our budget. And so that was a piece of gold that she gave us, put in a miscellaneous because it will cover those things that you just can't.
Yeah,
Fit anywhere else.
everything has to have a line,
It,
everything you spend.
it has to go somewhere. It has to have a name.
The name on it, right?
Yeah, whether it's Sunday school or whether it's personnel, or whether it's miscellaneous, or whether it's, you know, kitchen supplies, bathroom supplies, you know, we had all that lined out. And so this was just our overall, sometimes we would, in this particular budget format, I would just lump some things together, like operating expenses, you know, might be kitchen and bathroom supplies and, whatever, you know, whatever else didn't fit in a particular, you know, that might fit together, I would just lump them together for this, but then we had a line item for kitchen supplies, bathroom supplies, but I would lump them together for this. So those are some practical tips. Daily operations, thinking about budgeting, especially for church startup, have some different giving options for your church startup, church plant. You know, a lot of churches still pass a plate, you know, or they have a giving box now that we've had COVID. You can't pass a plate, you know, put it in the box. Our church that I attend, Taylor Valley Baptist Church, we don't pass plates anymore. There's a box. And that's one way to give. You can just, and I saw somebody on Sunday put their offering in that little box as they were walking down the hallway. So whatever that option is that somebody can directly give to the church by writing a check or putting cash, right? Other options would be electronic giving. In the back of the budget form, we started, what do you call it? Automatic draft. We started giving people the option. If you want to draft your gift to the church, of course, it's for people who have a set income, right? And we never had very many. I think there was at one time maybe 5 of us that did it. I loved it. And our church and our bank didn't charge us anything for it. They just did it because we were the church in town. And so I didn't have to worry about it. Our gift was going to the church every month and never had to worry about it. And so others liked that as well. We did institute a website giving, you know, through PayPal or whatever. That was never used very much. Some churches use text giving platforms, you know. Our church at Taylor Valley, you can go online and give through the website. That's how I do ours. I get a bank draft, but I do it every month because our income is different every month since I'm on.
Do you use QR codes at all to give QR code?
You can, I mean, you know, you can create, you know, something to direct somebody to a website or direct somebody to a place where you can give. We never instituted anything like that. We never used text giving. We didn't have, well, you know, some churches have kiosks, you know, where you can swipe a card or do whatever.
If you've got people under the age of 40 and you don't have some kind of, where they can go to their phone.
Yep.
At our church, we've got probably,
That's true.
I would say 60% of our people, you know, we don't see their envelope money or nothing. My wife.
Because they don't have an envelope.
No, because they go right there in the service on their phone.
Yep.
And they give through, we have Tidely,
Yeah,
which is similar to PayPal.
right.
And the only negative thing about it is we have to
Pay a fee.
remind them every now and then, you can pay the charge as you give your tithe. If you don't do it, then we have to pay a charge at the end of the month.
Mhm.
So like one month it was like $18, which to me was a little high, you know, because they didn't absorb the cost of the transfer or whatever that fee is.
Yeah.
Something.
What's that?
Yeah, usually it's
A lot.
well, PayPal is 3%, which can be a lot. And so
Yeah.
that's why we never had anybody get through that.
With the
Well,
tithing, what's the fee on the tithing?
Oh, I don't know what
Well,
the,
it depends on how you pay, cause I think if you do a bank draft, you know,
That's
the
right.
check set up through your bank account, I think it's free, I'm not sure.
Correct, it is.
Off the top of my head.
Mhm. So, but I would say 60% of our people give through using their phone.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I still write the check because,
What's a check?
you know, what's a check?
Well, I used to, send a bank check, I go on my bank website and just send a check to the church, because I didn't want them to have to pay my processing fee for my gift. But then they changed to whoever they use
Right.
now, Giving Fuel, I don't know who that is,
Mhm.
or whatever.
Right,
But they do offer a bank draft that doesn't cost them anything, so I draft my account, but I have to go in every month and do that.
Mhm.
There's no way to even set that up automatically.
So people have to think nowadays with a generation that only carries a card or has access to their bank account on the phone, everything you have at your church that most of the time a plate was passed, you're not gonna get giving for that evangelist or for that choir, or, the giving is gonna be low on it because you're not offering a way for people under about 40 to give. My daughters, they don't even know what a checkbook is,
And they don't carry cash.
and they don't carry cash.
No.
So, electronic transactions are a must for.
Do you go to your bank, to set that up? The bank, we have the bank account, do you tell the bank, okay,
You just do it.
how
on
do I
the-
get the text for them to,
It's a third party.
It's a third party.
oh, okay.
So you have
Yep.
to,
You tell the third party who your bank account is.
you set it all up with them, and they provide, that's what the fee is for,
Yeah,
Okay,
That's what
Yes,
Lively does.
to process the transactions.
Right.
okay.
Tidal is one, Giving Fuel is one,
There's a couple of them.
Push Pay is another one.
Do you all charge the same amount of percentage?
All of them are different.
All
All of them are different. Those are all three that work with churches that I know of.
But everywhere charges something,
Oh, yeah.
it doesn't matter, you can go
Right.
pay for your registration, they're gonna charge you extra.
Well, the government just says, hey, if you want to use your card, you gotta pay it.
Right.
They don't give you an option.
We wanted to offer the plate being passed,
Yes.
a box for people to
Right.
put it in, and an electronic.
I
But
agree.
we launched May 31st, 2020. So passing the plate wasn't an option. And because we
You
never
could pass
got,
it, nobody wanted to touch it.
right.
we never got into the habit of doing it. And so we have never incorporated that, but I wanted every form of giving that you could give to be done.
Right.
Right.
I'm with you. I think multiple options.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. Just have multiple options, multiple ways of giving, because not everybody's the same. Older people, they're gonna wanna probably write a check,
And put it on.
and put it in the plate or put it in the box. Personally, I like to be able to go online and take care of it.
Yeah, me too.
Cause I don't have to. I just don't,
Mhm.
it's just easy. It's just easy.
Easy,
And then they
yeah.
get the money right then,
Yeah.
they don't have to wait. Another practical consideration is just organizational, and that's to have some kind of accounting committee. You've got to have not just one person looking at that money
Yeah.
or touching that money. You've got to have more than one. So I said, when I got there was two people doing it and they were related. That was never a good idea. They're most wonderful people. They would never do anything. They wouldn't even be tempted to do anything. So we never worried about it. But then we transitioned into an accounting committee where we had two people who were not related, who would come together and do the counting, and that worked for a while, and then we got to where we couldn't find the right mixture of people. So then we just went to a counting committee of three people, and they rotated for 1 month each. And they would meet with our financial secretary, our ministry assistant, and she would be the one to lead that counting of the money. So there's a second set of eyes to be sure that everybody's seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
And then she puts it into the computer and so it was still this accountability. And then Mary Ann would then take the deposit report from what they filled out as a counting committee, the bank deposits that Tammy, our ministry assistant, deposited, make sure they matched. And then our ministry assistant, she could write checks, and she did when there was a need for that. But Mary Ann wrote all of our checks, but she never signed a check unless it was an emergency. She would bring the checks to our ministry assistant, she would sign them. So there was this, check and balance. There was this idea of everybody's watching everybody else, not because we believe that anybody's going to do anything wrong, but it just
It's
lessens
just safe.
the chance
Right.
of that happening.
Temptations,
You
Right.
don't wanna have,
temptation is
you don't wanna have a Judas situation.
Yeah, who was dipping his hand into the pot, right? I mean, and you see it in the news all the time.
Right.
It
Yeah.
happens, it does.
Yeah.
Happened in Bartlett, just, down the road from Holland where I was pastoring, the church secretary at the Lutheran church. Things were tight and she just started paying some of her own bills out of the church, with the church debit card and nobody was watching. And, after, she was gonna pay it back. Well, then it just never got paid back and it just kept going, adding up, and she was a wonderful person. She was very nice, but, she was doing something wrong. And, finally somebody said, wait a minute, what's all of this money for, And so you don't want to end up in that situation. So having some kind of accountability, having a committee meeting together, having a trustworthy and trained treasurer or financial secretary, we had our person, ministry assistant. She still works with me today. She's not at the church anymore, but she still works with me. And I trust her 100%, and she knew what I spent money on with the church and I gave her my receipts and all that. So there was this, everything was above board, everything was done. And then Mary Ann was the final say to look at it all. And if there was ever a question, she was going to ask it. Right. And I think, and I've said it several times, but I think that, the pastor, the ministry leader needs to be involved directly in making sure that the money is managed well. I never knew who gave. I said that earlier. I never asked that question. Some pastors, they know, they want to know. They check up on their deacons, those kinds of things. I never did. I just trust that the Lord's going to take care of that, right? So, but the pastor, I think, needs to be involved. And one of my biggest roles, I thought, was to be sure that we were being the best stewards of everything that we had. And so I tried to keep the expenses as low as possible, but not be, penny pinching and, people didn't have what they needed. But at the same time, there's just that balance, making sure that we have what we need, but not just going and buying whatever we want, because ultimately that's not gonna work. So, the other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, so we talked about planned spending, but planned saving. As a church, you've got to save some money for a rainy day, if you want to call it that. One of the best things that I did before I left the church was that we established what we call the Tomorrow Fund. And so we just said, we want a certain amount of money in this fund, and it's going to be there. It's a designated fund, so you can't use it but for these few things. Major expenditures that we weren't expecting. So lightning strikes the church and we have to replace 3 air conditioners all at once. All right, that's something we didn't plan for. Now, our insurance probably will pay for that.
Up to 9%.
But they're not going to pay for everything, and they're not going to pay right away. So we have some funds in savings ready to go if we need it. If something happened, and of course at the time I didn't know about a pandemic, right? But if something happens and we couldn't meet payroll, then that money could be used to pay our staff, to pay the bills for a certain, however long it would last. And then, so we had major expenses, major shortfall. That may have been the only 2 things you could use it for. You couldn't just use it for general maintenance. If an air conditioner went out, no, you can't dip into the Tomorrow Fund for that. It has to be something, because you should be planning for your maintenance things all along. So, so you have to have a balance between spending and saving. And most churches are either we were talking about this at the break. There are churches who go way over in the saving category, right? They have lots of money in savings and they don't want you to touch it. And if you talk about touching it, you're going to need to find another place to go look. This is our money. God gave us this money. We're really good stewards. We're going to invest it, is there for really bad things happening. First church that I pastored, they had lots of money in CDs, and they would use the interest off those CDs for missions. That's good, but you could not touch that principle for anything. They didn't want to talk about it. Holland never had that. This Tomorrow Fund was the first time they'd ever had any kind of savings. And so we just tried to balance spending, saving. So you don't want to be over in one category or another. The last thing, and this kind of goes along with spending and saving, is the issue of debt. Carl mentioned, that we did build a church facility, all debt free. Now, I didn't do that. The church had already committed that that's how they were going to build the church. But when they called me as pastor, they said, we're entering into a building program. How do you feel about that? I said, scares me to death. I've never been a part of a church that built anything other than a little shed for a van, and it was probably $2,000, right? And I said, it scares me to death. And they said, well, now we've also voted that we're going to do this debt free. How do you feel about that? I said, well, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. I said, that's the way I am attempting to live my life, the way I believe the church needs to. I would never want to come to be your pastor and lead you into $1 million worth of debt or whatever it is, and then God calls me somewhere else. I would feel horrible to leave you holding the bag, so to speak. So they knew where I stood, I knew where they stood. We had a financial, we had a guy that helped us with a building campaign. What do you call that? A consultant. And he said, you'll never get this church built doing it the way you're wanting to do it. And I said, well, then I guess we're never going to finish, because that's what the church wants to do. I'm not going to go against it. He says, you've got to go borrow the money from the bank and you can pay it back. It's no big deal. I said, the church has already voted and we're not doing that. And so he was convinced. Now it took 10 years. We did a lot of that. I mean, we did crazy stuff. We had revivals out there, no air conditioning, no lights, and no, sound was horrible. You probably couldn't understand half of what was really being. I was young, I could understand everything, but those older people, like if it was now, I'd be like, oh, what's he saying? So there was nothing to absorb in the sound. There was just going everywhere, concrete and wood, and we did all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And then when we moved into the building, I mean, the offices were finished. And that was it. We only had offices. We still met downtown at our civic center. And then we finished enough to get occupancy for the auditorium, and then we could have some classrooms. Now, I say we finished enough, that just meant, the fire marshal was like, okay, yeah, this will work, sheetrock on the walls,
Basically a shell.
basically. And, doors that all operated, right? Windows that opened and those kinds of things, air conditioning. And so it did, it took 10 years. And in January of 2015, we laid the flooring in the back part of the church, and in the auditorium, we put carpet. And that was the last thing that we did. And we said, it's finally finished. In 10 years, from January 2005, when we poured the concrete, to January 2015. But when I left the church, they didn't know anybody anyway. And I didn't have, and I told them I would stay. I committed that I would stay until that was done. So the building, I guess that's why it took 10 years, because I might have left before then, but God said, okay, you're staying, buddy. But I stayed 4 years past that. And now I will say this. If a church believes that God is leading them in a different direction and to take out debt for a building, that's between them and the Lord. That was what our church believed God was calling us to do, and that's what we did. And so every church has to decide, has to pray and make that decision for themselves.
Well, with some churches, it's not everyone, but quite frankly, when you take out debt with a bank, you should all ask the trustees to say, if you guys default on it, I'm going after you, trustee.
Correct. That's
So you may need some money man involved when you go into debt, because otherwise the bank's not gonna do it.
They're not gonna let you sign them without it.
yeah. And those people are responsible. If they put their name on there and the church defaults, who's gonna pay for it?
Yeah.
They are gonna pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
So, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, First Baptist Church of Colleen, it's good to have a guy named Jimmy Don Agar
Mm,
as part of your church.
Mm.
Because he helps. If you own a building problem, you're gonna need.
right, right.
So,
And not every church has that.
no.
But, you know, like I said, the church that I attend now, they're going into a building project, they're gonna borrow the money and. You know, but I think they have some of those people that we never had, you know,
Right.
and so. That's up to them. So plan giving, or plan spending, plan saving, and then plan giving. I think a church needs to be giving too. Bell Baptist Association, we always gave 3% or more to the Bell Baptist Association, 3% of whatever came in every month. Off the top. We also gave to cooperative program for the Baptist General Convention of Texas, so we gave a percentage, and it's in the budget if you want a copy of it, you can see what our giving was actually about 15%, because we gave to the Baptist General Convention.
Which is pretty good.
It was good.
Yeah.
We gave to BGCT, we gave to Bell Baptist Association, we gave to the Highland Lakes Baptist
So
Encampment,
you're giving basically more than
Texas,
five.
Texas Baptist Children's Home,
Yeah.
we gave. And then we did put some money aside for ourselves into the benevolence, you mentioned that earlier, we funded our own benevolence.
Mhm.
And then we also funded we called it Holland to the World Fund. And so that was a mission fund that we would then, if somebody from our church was going on a mission trip, we would give toward that. Or we helped fund missionaries from our church who were full-time missionaries. You know, we would use that for their support. So I think you've got to have all three, just like you do for personal finance, planned giving, saving, spending. Applies
And
for the church as well.
That large packet that, Randy had earlier that gives you the percentage of the budget that's being spent in that area. I think that it's good because it shows your church, like when I went to my previous pastorate, they were outside of giving to the cooperative program and some to the association, they gave nothing.
Hmm.
And so it gives them a realistic view of, you know, all your money is inwardly spent. You know, and it's easy to write a check to Lottie Moon and meet that goal, but then there's 11 more months out of the year, you know, and so by doing that, gives people a realistic view of who they are as a church and where their money's actually going.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, and that missions was the first category that I put in the budget, first
So people
pages,
can see.
because I wanted people to know we were giving church. And I had more than one person who joined our church and they said, we joined here because you've got a heart for mission. We
That's
see it in
exactly
your
what
budget.
happened.
We see it in your giving.
Yeah.
And that's who I was as the pastor. I wanted our church to be, I believed in missions. I wanted to be giving toward missions, and so, and that means more than just those things, you know, international missions. It means taking care of widows and orphans. It takes care of the poor, you know, those are all missions in my mind. And so if you get one of these copies that Carl's gonna make for you, hopefully, or you can send it to him electronically, you know, then you don't have to have the
Right.
expense of printing it out. So he has an electronic copy if you want it. And you can just see, and that's why I put that first. We're giving first. And then you put your personnel in, and that's always gonna be your biggest expense. You know, people wanna know why we're spending 34% on our personnel. Well, you know, it's just, it's the way it is, you know, and then you kind of break down the rest of it from there, but, any questions on budget? We can talk all night. I've got a whole bunch more notes, but we've kind of hit the highlights, which is good. All right, Carl, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, one thing I appreciate about Randy is some of our topics are a lot more exciting than others. This is not one of them. This is not one of them. But the reality is, it's the necessity of it.
Right.
And when it's done well, going into churches in my first church, my first pastorate, not having been taught anything like this, not knowing how to lead a business meeting. Miss Mary Ann saying, here's something you can follow. I wish I would have been given that when I went to my first pastorate. So.
Yeah, the thought that comes to my mind, is when Jesus said something about how, you know, when you're being attacked by your enemy, you have to count the cost. So do I have the money or, you know, to hire a mercenary thing? Mercenary,
Or build a tower.
build a tower or anything like that, so you have to have that